Luckily, I was able to retrieve the sword. Night Wind stepped in front of Miss Mirror and bowed. He placed the sword down in front of her. The Duke was gone, so it seemed that Night Wind had gotten rid of the man. The sword was broken? Miss Mirror asked, looking directly at Night Wind. She didn't stoop to touch the sword. It seemed like a pointless question to ask, but there was a deeper meaning to her inquiry. Night Wind knew what she was asking. He immediately answered, "When I pulled it out, it was broken already, and I couldn't find any pieces of the blade in the surrounding area either. I tested what's left of the blade, and while I don't know what level it is, it could cut through the rubble like butter." Han Sen understood. Night Wind had answered 3 of Miss Mirror's questions. He wasn't the one to break the sword, and the sword hadn't broken recently. Furthermore, the sword power was still inside it. "Let's see if we can use it to widen the hole in the tree," Miss Mirror instructed Night Wind, still not touching the sword herself. Han Sen knew why Miss Mirror didn't want to accept the sword. She still didn't know if Night Wind was going to betray her. If he really held traitorous intentions, he would reveal his true self and strike Miss Mirror down as soon as she took the sword. Miss Mirror didn't want to go against Night Wind just yet, so she didn't want to touch the sword. First, she wanted to see if Night Wind could cut the tree open. If he was unable to widen the hole, then the Requiem egg tree would remain beyond their reach. In that case, they would no longer have any reason to distrust each other, and they'd continue cooperating in order to remove their red-eye affliction. Night Wind was the strongest one there, so they would need his help. "Let me see what I can do to free the egg," Night Wind said, and then he approached the opening in the Requiem tree. He lifted the sword and slashed toward the hole. The dark color of the blade spread, and Night Wind's dark substance chain struck the tree hole. The darkness broke and spilled everywhere. But when the blade of the broken sword slammed into the hole, it bit into the trunk of the tree, splitting the wood in a narrow gash. "It works!" Night Wind exulted. He pulled the broken sword free and then continued to strike the tree hole. Wood chips flew everywhere, and the fist-sized hole got bigger and bigger. Han Sen and Miss Mirror simply stood beneath the tree, watching. While the broken sword was capable of cutting the tree, the wood of the tree itself was still incredibly hard. Night Wind was making progress, but only a few centimeters were achieved with each strike. After slashing at the tree for half an hour, the hole had been expanded to the size of a frying pan's lid. The Requiem tree egg still wasn't visible through the hole, of course. "We're almost there. Try to pull the egg out so that we can confirm that it's genuine," Miss Mirror said from down below. Night Wind slung the broken sword across his back. He put his hand inside and felt around until he got a firm grip on the egg. Then he pulled the egg out as far as it would go. Only the tip was showing, though, as the hole was too small to pull the egg out completely. From the part of it that was showing, the Requiem tree egg appeared to be transparent. It looked like amber, in that it was tinged with a bit of gold. It looked pretty. It gave off a fragrance that awakened Han Sen's senses, like his body was being rinsed clean by some holy liquid. "It is a Requiem tree egg," Night Wind said with a grin. Miss Mirror looked awed. Han Sen had never seen a Requiem tree egg before, so he didn't know what it was supposed to look like. But that gold crystal was obviously some good stuff. Once they had confirmed the nature of the orb inside the tree, Night Wind let the egg fall back into the hole and went back to hacking at the tree trunk using the broken sword. Wood chips and shavings flew everywhere as the hole grew steadily larger. Han Sen and Miss Mirror looked at each other. They could see the greediness and awareness in each other's eyes. Such a giant Requiem tree egg was the rarest of treasures. They all wanted it for themselves, but Night Wind was too powerful, and Han Sen and Miss Mirror couldn't predict if Night Wind would betray them. In addition to being deified, he was now wielding that deadly broken sword. If he did decide to turn on them, Han Sen and Miss Mirror would be in a lot of danger. After another hour of hacking away at the tree hole was an entire meter wide. It seemed as if they'd be able to pull the tree egg out now. Night Wind swung the broken sword across his back. He leaned into the greatly expanded hole, using his hands to try to pull the egg out into the open. Night Wind applied steady pressure, and the egg began to slide steadily, if slowly, out of the hole. The giant Requiem tree egg was gold like amber, and the small section that had been revealed so far looked like the narrow end of a chicken's egg. All 3 of them froze as they stared not at the egg itself, but at what lay beneath the egg's transparent exterior. Within that small end of the gold egg, they could see a head. It looked like the head of someone who was either a human or one of the Extreme King. The head appeared to belong to an 18-year-old girl. Her eyes were closed peacefully, and her hair appeared to be gold, but they couldn't tell if that was just the tint of the tree egg or her natural color. Her eyelashes were long. In that serene pose, she looked like Sleeping Beauty from the fairy tale. Why does the Requiem tree egg have a creature inside it? Night Wind asked, looking at the tree egg with confusion. Miss Mirror looked at the tree egg, shook her head, and said, I don't know. I've never heard of such a giant Requiem tree egg, and I've never heard of there being life inside one of them. Is the Requiem tree a xenogenic? Can the Requiem tree breed and produce life? Han Sen asked uncertainly. Maybe she accidentally entered the tree hole and died, and then her body was covered by resin. Maybe that is how she ended up like this. Night Wind mumbled thoughtfully to himself. Han Sen's eyes suddenly hardened. He gritted his teeth and said, Now we have one more person. When Night Wind and Miss Mirror heard him, their brows furrowed. The prediction of the 6 pictures revealed 4 faceless men. They thought that they had changed things by getting rid of the Duke. When their numbers were reduced to 3, they thought they had trumped the prophecy. But now the tree egg had a human-like creature inside, and that brought their numbers back up to 4. The 3 of them looked at each other nervously. Night Wind gnashed his teeth. He wanted to push the tree egg back into the hole. But the tree egg suddenly shone with a golden light, and a wave of power tossed Night Wind away from the egg and the girl it contained. The egg shot out of the hole like a bullet, then fell to the ground where it rolled for a bit. Now that they could see the tree egg's full appearance, it was just as Miss Mirror had predicted. 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide. It was like a giant amber egg. A naked, 15-year-old girl lay inside that tree egg. Beneath the blonde hair that spread across her shoulders, they could see a tattoo covering her whole back. A 9-life cat. Han Sen thought the instant he saw the tattoo. His nostrils flared, and he barely kept himself from shouting the words. This is rather ominous, Han Sen thought in his heart. He quickly reviewed the facts. There was a giant Requiem tree inside Do God City. The tree contained a giant Requiem egg, and there was a girl frozen within that egg, for some reason. The girl had a 9-life cat tattoo across her entire back. Han Sen's mind raced for an explanation, but he couldn't come up with one. The sight of a 9-life cat tattoo on a woman's back was familiar to Han Senator. This girl's tattoo looked the same as Zero's. It was exactly the same, in fact, and that was why Han Sen was so shocked. Is that girl inside the egg Zero's sister? But that doesn't make sense. Do God City fell 1 billion years ago. How long has Zero been alive? It doesn't seem as if the 2 of them could be related. But then, why would they have the same tattoo on their backs? Is it the same organization's branding? Blood Legion symbol is the 9-life cat, but Blood Legion hasn't been around as long as Do God City, and their history doesn't reach back to the time before it fell. That god *MN old cat. He must know all the answers I'm looking for. Han Sen was giving himself a headache trying to figure all this out. He wanted to lay his hands on that old cat and string it up. He wanted to torture the feline so that he could learn everything it knew. Catcha! A snapping sound suddenly came from the egg, pulling Han Sen out of his thoughts. A crack had formed across the golden egg. Is that girl still alive? Han Sen asked in amazement, slowly taking a single step back. Miss Mirror, Night Wind, and Han Sen all had the same reaction. After falling back a little ways, they stopped. They couldn't escape now. They hadn't found a cure for their red eyes, and they were sure to die if they chose to leave. But Han Sen was worried about something a little different. Although he also had red eyes that he couldn't get rid of, he was more afraid that the weird power might be contagious. He didn't want to risk infecting Bauer or Ningyu. That was why he had come here. He wanted to find some way to remove the infectious power, and if this abandoned city didn't present any answers, he planned to try getting rid of the red eyes with his super god spirit body. Han Sen had no control over what was occurring, and he couldn't even tell if it was dangerous or not. He wanted to flee, but before he had time to turn and run, he heard a humming tone like the sound one might expect from a viola. The giant egg cracked like glass around the form of the blonde girl, then shattered completely. Seeing the scattered remains of the egg, Night Wind gnashed his teeth and dropped into a defensive crouch. His dark substance chains then shot out to collect all of the pieces of the egg. The egg had disintegrated and fallen to the ground, but the girl still hung in the air. Her body was curled up in fetal position, and an intriguing scent wafted from her. She smelled like the requiem tree egg, but better. One moment Han Sen thought he could barely smell the scent, and the next moment it was almost overpowering. I don't care who or what you are. I have to kill you now. Dark substance chains circled and writhed around Night Wind's body, and he sent increasing amounts of power into the hand that wasn't holding the broken sword. After charging up his strike for a few seconds, he slashed at the girl. Night Wind had no choice. If he didn't go forward with this, the red-eye power would drive him insane. The only escape from this fate was to acquire more power. His sword of darkness tore through the air toward the sleeping girl. The girl's body looked as if it was shielded by some invisible power. When Night Wind's dark substance chains got within a foot of the girl, they shattered. His power couldn't reach her. Night Wind roared like thunder and prepared to slash with the broken sword instead. His dark substance chains were unable to damage the girl, so he poured all of his strength into the broken sword. Since the broken sword was able to damage the requiem tree, he believed it should be able to harm the girl's seemingly delicate skin. The blade hissed through the air toward her, and it didn't explode like the dark substance chain. He slashed downwards, but the sword moved so slowly. It was like the sword was gradually slicing through some invisible substance. The sword descended toward the girl's throat. The blade was going to touch her skin. As this occurred, the girl's eyes moved beneath their eyelids. It seemed as if she was about to wake up. Her blonde hair silently waved and shimmered. To Night Wind's surprise, the girl's blonde hair rose and wrapped around the blade of the broken sword, stopping the weapon in an instant. Night Wind stared. The broken sword that could cut through the requiem tree was unable to cut the girl's hair. Still gripping the broken sword by its handle, Night Wind used his substance chain in an attempt to pull the broken sword out of the entrapment of the girl's hair. He tugged at it a few times, but it didn't budge. The girl finally opened her eyes. She had gold irises. She looked expressionlessly at Night Wind. Either that, or she was simply looking forward, and he happened to be in the way. Night Wind was a very decisive individual. When he was unable to pull the sword from her grasp, he abandoned the sword and turned to run. Han Sen and Miss Mirror had started running as soon as Night Wind attacked the girl. Speaking of running, Han Sen was the best at that. He ran faster than Miss Mirror, and that put him in front. Miss Mirror wasn't slow, but she was king class. She wouldn't be as fast as Night Wind anymore, either. Night Wind quick sped by her. Han Sen used his Dongxian area, which allowed him to see everything. Night Wind didn't slow down. He was headed past Han Sen like he was teleporting. But with his expanded vision, Han Sen saw something hit Miss Mirror in her back. She tumbled to the ground with blood bubbling over her lips. And then, all of a sudden, the blonde girl was standing right next to Han Senator. Not even the Dongxian area had warned him that she was coming. Pucha! Night Wind had been moving around Han Sen, and when the blonde girl appeared, he almost bumped into her. He raised his arms to defend himself, but it was too late. The blonde girl was holding the broken sword, and she thrust it into Night Wind's heart with an almost casual motion. Time stood still. Miss Mirror was on the ground. Han Sen was standing next to the blonde girl, and the blonde girl had stabbed the broken sword into Night Wind's chest. It was just like the fourth picture. Was it really a prophetic drawing? Han Sen wondered. The only thing he knew for sure was that he would be unable to escape the girl. Not even the deified Night Wind had stood a chance against her speed. Night Wind had been stabbed, and his face hadn't changed a bit. He did not have blood ooze from his chest, either. His body simply melted into the darkness and became formless. Then, he went a space. The blonde-haired girl was still holding the broken sword in its thrusting position. She did not blink, and she still looked incredibly cold. It was like she had no focus. But that broken sword's symbols had some golden flames on it. The broken sword was burning like a sun. It was shining with a scary, golden light. Arg! Night Wind had become one with the darkness. Not even the broken sword cut hurt him now, but he screamed when the sun-like gold light shined on him. His body was fading into the gold light that was like a sun. It only took a second to completely destroy his life force.
Han Sen felt a chill.
Night Wind was a deified elite, and he had been killed in moments. Miss Mirror was severely injured, and she wouldn't be getting back to her feet anytime soon. Blood continued to trickle past her lips, but luckily, her life force still seemed stable. She was wounded, but not dying. Han Sen turned around and looked at the blonde girl, and he noticed that she had turned around to look at him, too. They stared at each other, only a single step separating them. What the hell is happening right now? Han Sen wondered. His heart was pounding like it was about to jump out of his chest, and he considered teleporting to the sanctuaries immediately. This blonde girl had just executed a deified elite as easily as Han Sen might step on an insect. Attempting to fight her would be a death wish. Han Sen didn't want to die, so he didn't attempt to fight back or make any moves that the girl might interpret as aggression. But when Han Sen saw the girl's eyes, he resisted the urge to hop back to the sanctuaries. She didn't look murderous. Of course, that wasn't the most important reason that Han Sen was staying here rather than fleeing to the sanctuaries. He could already tell that the girl could strike with her sword much more quickly than Han Sen could use the Blood Pull Sutra to open a portal. She could cut his head off before he even finished summoning power. So instead of running or fighting, both of them just stood there. Han Sen didn't move. He was afraid that any motion on his part might cause the blonde girl to attack. But the blonde girl just stood where she was, not attacking. She looked in Han Sen's direction, but her eyes didn't seem focused. It was hard to tell if she really was looking at him. Han Sen remained motionless as cold sweat beaded on his brow. The scary girl was as still as stone, and they had been staring at each other for 10 minutes. If they had been in a bar or pub, staring at a beautiful blonde girl for a prolonged amount of time would have been an enjoyable, relaxing thing for Han Senator. Instead, they were in an abandoned city in a cursed land, and Han Sen was anything but relaxed. Looking at a pretty girl was like looking at a beautiful painting. Han Sen didn't need to touch it to enjoy the experience. But right now, Han Sen had difficulty breathing under the pressure. Every second felt as long as a century. That girl was pretty indeed. She was like a blonde princess from a fairy tale, but no matter how attractive she was, thinking about how easily she had just killed a deified extreme king kept Han Sen from calming himself down. Who knew when she might suddenly decide to cut Han Sen in half with a single swing of her sword? You should move. Show me a sign. Are we fighting or seeking peace? Han Sen thought desperately. Sweat was running down his face now. He thought of a million ideas, but the girl was still just looking at him. Her eyes were dull, like she was badly dazed. Han Sen gritted his teeth. He gradually moved his foot, wanting to step away from her, wondering if he could walk off slowly without disturbing her. But he had only taken half a step when the blonde girl took one whole step toward Han Senator. She almost bumped into him. Han Sen immediately stopped, which made the girl stop as well. Both of them were much closer now. Han Sen could almost feel the girl's breath, and he could smell her perfume again. Han Sen didn't move, and the girl didn't either. The two of them continued to stare at each other again. Oh, my God. What is happening here? Is this girl really a princess? Does she think I am so handsome that she doesn't want to kill me? Does she want to marry me instead? Just tell me if you want to marry me. Don't just stand there doing nothing. It's creepy. Han Sen thought. If this girl liked him, she should summon her courage and tell him. If she was in love with him, that was totally fine. It was better than killing him, anyway. If something didn't happen soon, the tension was going to make Han Sen explode. The girl clearly hadn't noticed how rigid and uncomfortable he was. Her eyes were still unfocused. When she stepped forward as he stepped away, it was probably a subconscious reaction. Han Sen didn't know what the girl would do once she woke up. If she had injured Miss Mirror and killed Night Wind without even being fully conscious, she must be pretty scary. Then Han Sen remembered something that made it seem even less likely that this would end well for him. The first 4 pictures on the screen had already come true. When Han Sen remembered the scene from the 5th picture, his heart began beating even faster. In the 5th picture, one faceless man had been lying on the ground, and 2 other faceless men appeared to be fighting. One of them was gripping the other's neck. Han Sen could guess that the faceless man on the ground represented Miss Mirror, which meant that the fighting faceless men were the girl and himself. If he fought someone with her power, there was no way he could win. Thinking of Miss Mirror, Han Sen glanced over at her. She was in a much better condition, and her wounds were healing quickly, but she lay on the ground, not attempting to get up or run away. Why isn't she running? Han Sen thought to himself. Then, he understood. She must have remembered the fifth picture as well. If the fifth picture came true, she might be the safest by remaining on the ground. If she got up to run, perhaps she would end up as the one fighting. So evil, Han Sen thought. The girl still hadn't moved, but it did seem as if her eyes were starting to brighten. She was slowly starting to wake up. Han Sen kept thinking, if those pictures are true, then only two faceless men will exist by the sixth picture. One will be on the floor, and the other will be kneeling in prayer before the statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. I don't know if the one on the floor is dead or alive. If they are alive, then that means either Miss Mirror or I will survive. Only one of us will live, but that doesn't matter. Miss Mirror will be the one who dies. I will be the one who gets out. Han Sen was confident about this. He was very confident because he had the super god spirit body. He couldn't beat the girl, but he could use the short period of invincibility to return to the sanctuary. Han Sen continued to think, and Miss Mirror remained on the ground, waiting for some chance. The girl, meanwhile, was looking at Han Senator. None of them were moving. It was like time had stood still, and everything was silent. Life and awareness were flowing back into the girl's eyes. Only her eyes seemed to change, but somehow, they made her whole body seem different. She had moved like an emotionless killing machine when she first came out of the egg, but now she seemed like a real human. The girl blinked, and Han Sen's heart jumped in response. With this girl now awake, God only knew what she might do. After the girl blinked, she seemed to come back to herself fully. She saw Han Sen, and so she moved. She jumped to him and grabbed him by the neck. Han Sen felt something very powerful coming his way. His body leaned back reflexively, trying to get away from it. The blonde girl leaped on top of him. Miss Mirror didn't move as the girl jumped and wrapped her arms around Han Sen's neck, her weight slamming into his chest and taking him to the ground. They both became entangled, just as the fifth picture on the screen had shown. Han Sen had prepared himself for the inevitable fight, and as they fell, Han Sen's eyes started to turn white as he summoned his super god spirit body. Big brother, Warner has been waiting for you to come back. The blonde girl was riding Han Sen hard, and she now wore a beautiful smile. She clutched his face, lowered her head, and kissed Han Sen on the forehead. Han Sen was stunned. He didn't know what was going on, but the glowing white in his eyes started to recede. Han Sen was still trying to summon his super god spirit body, but it vanished after the girl kissed him. Something else disappeared, too. The blonde girl's golden light rapidly faded into nothing. The blonde hair that had shone like a sun was now like a fire that had been extinguished. It darkened until she had a full head of black hair. Even her golden pupils were now as dark as ink. I can finally be with Big Brother again. Warner pulled herself back upright, sitting on Han Sen's chest. She looked at Han Sen with her beautiful smile. That sweet and happy smile made Han Sen freeze. At that moment, she looked so incredibly innocent. The next second, her eyelids fluttered closed. She looked soft as she slumped down on Han Sen's chest, and a few seconds later, she lost consciousness. Hey, lady, you have it wrong. I'm not your big brother. Han Sen shifted the girl who referred to herself as Warner, sliding his arms under her as he climbed back to his feet. Her skin appeared smooth, and it was very soft. Han Sen could no longer feel her scary presence and power. Her life force had dropped to a tiny fraction of what it had been. Now she was as weak as a commoner in this universe, or perhaps even weaker. If Han Sen hadn't seen her transform with his own eyes, he never would have imagined that this black-haired girl was the blonde girl who had taken out the deified night wind in a single blow. Han Sen realized that the tattoo of the nine-life cat on her back was now gone. The skin of her back was smooth and white as if the tattoo had never existed in the first place. What is going on? Han Sen frowned. When he scanned the girl, he confirmed that she had passed out, but she was still alive. Her life force was so low that it was concerning, however. It was hard to imagine how she had been able to blast out the scary power she had used earlier. Lady, wake up. Han Sen pressed his finger to her lips to see if she really was in a coma or if she was just pretending instead. But he quickly pulled his finger back, startled. The girl Warner didn't wake up, and her pink skin was bleeding where Han Sen had pressed his finger, as if her skin was fragile and paper-thin. Han Sen hadn't even used strength. With the strength she had previously demonstrated, there should have been no way for Han Sen to leave a mark on her body, even if he used his full strength. But he had just slightly tapped her lips, and now the skin was broken and bleeding. She was no longer what she had been when she first woke up. What is this? What's going on with her? Han Sen looked at the girl weirdly. Miss Mirror eventually got back to her feet. She picked up the broken sword and tried to stab Lady Warner. Han Sen tightened his arms around the girl and dodged. Miss Mirror directed a hard stare at him. What are you doing? Now is the best time to kill her. If she wakes up and becomes that blonde B*TCH again, we won't be able to kill her. Then we'll be the ones to die. Han Sen frowned and looked at the girl. He had thought about doing this as well. He knew Miss Mirror was right. The girl's body was like that of an average person right now. A random strike could kill her. This really was their best chance. If she woke up and engaged her blondie mode, he and Miss Mirror would be unable to touch her. They might be in grave danger. In the sixth picture, there were only two faceless people. That meant one of them was gone. If they didn't kill the blonde girl now, that meant one of them would have to die. What happened next might be a conflict between Han Sen and Miss Mirror. Because of all these things, killing the girl really seemed like the best choice. It would certainly sort out many of their current troubles, and it could heighten their chances for survival. But Han Sen still hesitated. What Warner said to Han Sen before she fainted made him think. He didn't think he was actually Warner's big brother, but killing a girl who wasn't currently hostile and couldn't fight back was something Han Sen couldn't make himself do. And there was one thing that really did nag at him. His super god spirit body was supposed to be invincible, but the girl's power had been able to cancel its activation. He was really confused about what had happened there. His super god spirit power hadn't been destroyed, just pushed back. Han Sen could activate the super god spirit body again, but the girl had done something that he had never experienced before. He cared deeply about what it could mean. Miss Mirror knew what Han Sen was thinking. She lifted the sword and pointed it at the girl, saying, "Don't get fooled by what she said." She probably knew she couldn't last long, and that's why she said it. She wanted to give you a reason to keep her alive. Shouldn't you know that she isn't your real sister? She isn't my sister, but I can't do it. Han Sen took off his jacket and covered the girl's body. The girl could have killed him, but she hadn't. Han Sen knew that things were not as Miss Mirror was saying. If you cannot do it, then I will do it. Miss Mirror growled. I'm sorry, but there is something I would like to ask her. Let's decide once she is woken up, Han Sen said as he held the girl. You are a gentleman, but you seem to have forgotten what the sixth picture depicts. Miss Mirror laughed darkly. I didn't forget. But you really don't think that can predict our future, do you? Han Sen asked calmly. I don't know if it can predict our future, but everything predicted by the prior pictures came true. We have to be careful, Miss Mirror said. Han Sen knew Miss Mirror was correct. He sighed and said, You should just go. Let me handle this. I will continue to explore. Even if the prophetic picture is correct, it doesn't say that whoever isn't in the picture ends up dead. You and I have exchanged minds. You know what my personality is like. Miss Mirror didn't move. She raised the sword and pointed it at the girl in Han Sen's arms. Han Sen knew Miss Mirror's personality well. She was ambitious, and that ambition compelled her to control every scenario. She wouldn't allow others to dictate what course her future would take. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to the stone fields in the first place. She only had to send Han Sen, Night Wind, or even Red Cloud. My lady, can't you see that we are walking right into that prophecy? Han Sen looked at Miss Mirror. He had never believed in the prophecy anyway. Around the same time as the girl broke out of the egg, the human stone in the camp melted like ice. But instead of water, a substance that looked like blood emerged from the melting stone. The two guinea pigs inside the warehouse witnessed this happen, and they backed away from the stone with wide eyes. They screamed and turned to run, but when their mouths opened, they stopped mid-stride. Their eyes turned red, and a scary presence came out of them. More of that red blood oozed from the stone. It began to rise from the ground as a vapor, spreading to fill the surrounding air. All the members of Spring Rain and the workers that were nearby fell under the influence of that invisible power. They all leveled up, their power increasing so quickly that it almost seemed like they were cheating. They increased one level, and their genes grew stronger. All of the nearby kings became half-deified, and the half-deifieds actually downgraded to become measly dukes. The creatures that had already been affected by the stone didn't change again, but other than those few who had already been altered, there was only one anomaly: Ningyu. He hadn't been affected in any capacity. His little green sword groaned, then flew up and landed in Ningyu's hand. It shone green, bathing him in a protective light. In Han Sen's room, Bauer was still playing games with Falling Leaf. She looked up suddenly, and her face grew worried. She raised her hand and summoned a little gourd. The little gourd shone with a weird light of its own, covering herself, Falling Leaf, and the little red bird. "What are you doing?" Falling Leaf asked, having no idea what Bauer was actually doing. She saw the shining little gourd, but she didn't notice any of the other powers that were at play. "Nothing. Let's continue our card game," Bauer said with a blink. Falling Leaf made no comment, and they resumed their game. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, the stone had completely melted. A white-haired man with white clothing had been revealed, sitting exactly where the stone had been. He looked pale, and he smelled musty and ancient. It was as if he had been sitting there forever, watching the days and the moons go by, and the stars themselves fall to darkness. Time must have moved like a river for him. It was like nothing in the world could leave a mark on him. The rise and fall of empires were mere moments to a man like this. He let out a sigh. The man opened his eyes, and then he spoke to himself. "After all these lifetimes, I just want to get drunk with you. Is there any point living in this world without you?" The white-haired man stood up and exited the warehouse. The infected creatures of the base, meanwhile, were in the midst of fighting each other. Their levels had increased or decreased, and their eyes had turned red. They became insane and bloodthirsty, trying to kill anyone they could reach. All kinds of powers were being used across the base. If the base hadn't been built out of the sturdy black rock, it would have been reduced to a ruin by now. The white-haired man walked through the various pitched battles, but none of the crazed people attacked him. No power dared to land on him. He slid through the base like a ghost, immaterial and untouchable. The man walked out of the base camp and turned his gray eyes up to look at the stars above. The buildings behind him began to collapse under the ferocity of the fights, and explosions of power bloomed like fireworks. But the man was wholly uninterested, and he continued talking to himself. "This world is so boring without you." The white-haired man looked at the base, and his eyes drifted toward Bauer's room. Then, his calm eyes suddenly looked shocked. Pang! Falling Leaf and Bauer were in the middle of playing card games. Suddenly, a booming noise shook the room, and the walls collapsed like the petals of a flower. But not a single piece of debris came near them. When Falling Leaf looked outside, her eyes opened wide. The entire base was little more than a ruin. Spring Rain members and workers were all mixed together, fighting and killing each other like they'd been possessed. Dead bodies and torn flesh were strewn about in pools of blood. "Are you guys crazy?" Falling Leaf shouted. But the crazed fighters paid no heed to her cry. They continued butchering each other in a frenzy. Amidst the killing, the white-haired man walked gracefully toward them. He moved effortlessly through the destruction, and the violence fell away from him like oil over water. Falling Leaf's heart leaped inside her chest. She flipped her hand and quickly brought out a dagger. She looked at the white-haired man and said firmly, "Stop. If you step closer, I'll kill you." The white-haired man behaved as if he hadn't heard her. He kept walking toward the room, peering at Bauer, who was atop the sofa. She gave 3 warnings, but the white-haired man didn't seem to hear her. Falling Leaf had no idea what was going on, but Miss Mirror had commanded that she look after Bauer and keep the girl safe, and that was exactly what Falling Leaf would do. She thrust her dagger at the white-haired man. Falling Leaf's entire person seemed to connect with the universe. For a moment she was extending her dagger in an attack, and that moment froze, hovering like an afterimage. Then the afterimage vanished, and the only thing left behind was the sinking feeling of watching yellow leaves fall in late autumn, withered and dying. That feeling of death flashed by the white-haired man, harmless. Falling Leaf was back where she had started as if nothing had happened. But Falling Leaf's pupils grew smaller. Her assassination skills were top-notch, and her full power attacks were a threat to even deified elites. But this man had simply ignored her attack, and he was still headed for Bauer as if nothing had happened. How is that possible? Falling Leaf couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at the white-haired man. Her chest constricted with sudden fear. She had no idea how the white-haired man might have broken her strongest attack. Although he didn't look strong, there was a cold feeling in her stomach. Merely looking at the man gave Falling Leaf the creeps. The man never looked at Falling Leaf, though. His attention was focused on Bauer. Bauer grabbed her little gourd. Her face looked very dire, and she stared at the man as if he was an enemy. Boom. The little red bird on Bauer's shoulder seemed to feel that it needed to intervene as well. It flew off of Bauer's shoulder, becoming a scary fire phoenix that hovered right beside the girl. It cried at the white-haired man in warning, but it didn't attack. It actually looked quite afraid of the white-haired man. Interesting. Is this a combination of a phoenix and a fishbird? To be able to do this? This is quite interesting. The white-haired man finally averted his gaze from Bauer to look at the little red bird, intrigued. Falling Leaf was frozen. She had thought the little red bird on Bauer's shoulder was a useless pet, but the scary presence it now exuded told her that it was actually a deified xenogeniac. The next second, an even scarier thing happened. The white-haired man simply reached out and grabbed the fire phoenix out of the air. The bird's fire vanished, and it didn't even have a chance to resist. It returned to being that little red bird in his hands, and it couldn't fly away. The white-haired man looked at the little red bird in his hand. It kept squirming, thrashing its wings as it tried to escape the grasp. He spoke to himself, saying, "You really have phoenix and fishbird genes? And it is still so young? Who could do something like this?" Bauer looked at the white-haired man. She blinked and said, "Are you going to bully a kid and her pet?" When the white-haired man heard Bauer, he turned to her and smiled. Raising his hand, he freed the little red bird. It flapped its wings and quickly hid behind Bauer, too afraid to reveal itself. "What is your name?" the white-haired man asked Bauer. "Bauer, Han Bauer," Bauer answered seriously. Aside from the times when she was with Han Sen and Ji Yanran, she was rarely so honest. "Not bad. Say hi to your father for me." The white-haired man nodded to Bauer, then turned to leave. "What is your name?" Bauer asked, looking at the white-haired man's back. "Tai E." The white-haired man didn't look back. He kept on walking. After a few steps, though, his body began to disappear into a ripple in space. "What are you doing?" Bauer asked, calling in a debt. "It's time that I get back something that doesn't belong to them." The white-haired man's voice echoed through the cosmos, drifting from an increasing distance until it vanished entirely. Falling Leaf was left trembling. She had never seen someone use a teleportation skill while still sending back their voice. Even King Bai couldn't do something like that. As Falling Leaf recovered from her shock, someone cried out, calling for aid. "Help!" They turned around, and a girl wearing pink clothing was running through in the middle of the fight. She sprinted toward them, screaming and sobbing. A Duke xenogeniac worker was chasing after her. It had no weapon, and it was reaching for the woman with its bare hands. Based on how she was moving, the woman seemed stronger than the Duke worker. But she also looked terrified, and she ran recklessly without the will or courage to look back. Bauer cocked her head curiously as Ningyu approached. She remembered Ningyu, and no matter how much she tried, she couldn't connect this Ningyu with the powerful person she used to know. "Help me. Bauer, help me." Ningyu pleaded, running forward like a dog with its tail between its legs. Falling Leaf was about to stop Ningyu, but Bauer hastily told her, "Let him come." Ningyu stumbled clumsily into the ruins of the room, and when she got there, she hid behind Bauer, still shaking. Too scary. Save me, Bauer." "Huh. Little Miss Ningyu, you should be much stronger than that lame Duke. What are you afraid of?" Bauer laughed, looking at Ningyu as if she was eyeing a fun new toy. Tremors still ran through Ningyu's body. Her face looked pale. She really seemed to be rattled. Fighting is wrong. Murder is even more wrong. Plus, I am such a beautiful girl. Huh. Bauer couldn't help but laugh. Her eyes smiled like a crescent moon, and she stroked Ningyu's hair. Right. You were so right. Pretty and cute girls like us shouldn't be fighting and killing. I know, right? Ningyu frantically nodded her agreement. She still looked to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Falling Leaf didn't agree at all. She swiftly used her dagger to cut the Duke's head off. What happened? Why is this happening? Does this have something to do with that man? Falling Leaf looked around. The killing was taking place everywhere, and she didn't seem to know where to look. More creatures were toward them. Falling Leaf warned them loudly to stay back, but they didn't listen to her words, and so she had to fight and cut them down. Han Sen and Miss Mirror were still having a standoff. Neither of them had yet made the first move. Me or her? You can only pick one. Miss Mirror eyed Han Sen, her grip on the broken sword still tight. Let's leave here together. This place is so scary. It will be safer if we go someplace with more people. Han Sen smiled. Safety depends on what kind of partner you have. I don't want to haul a ticking time bomb around with me, not knowing if it will explode at any moment, Miss Mirror said. Then how about you keep going on ahead by yourself, and I will turn back with the girl. Is that okay? Han Sen said after a moment of thought. No. Do you want her to bring harm to my spring rain? Miss Mirror frowned. Then I will wait here with her and not go anywhere, Han Sen said. No. If you cannot do it, then I will do it for you, Miss Mirror said. She swung her sword at the girl in Han Sen's arms. Miss Mirror had become king class, but her will and intelligence were still deified. Her slash appeared like a rainbow, not straight, but mysteriously curved. It made it very difficult to tell where the sword was headed. Han Sen's movements were also difficult to predict, but after a couple of attempts to evade the attack, he was still unable to dodge Miss Mirror's sword. He threw his palm out to intercept the broken sword. He touched its hilt, but not its blade. The broken sword could cut through a requiem tree, so it was far too sharp to counter directly. Han Sen wouldn't use his own weapon to block the blow. Even a deified treasure might be destroyed by the broken sword. But when his palm struck the hilt of the broken sword, a sharp pain seared through his chest. A wave of power sent him flying and made his ribs groan under the strain. He tasted blood in the back of his mouth. What's going on? Something injured my chest. Is this my own power? Han Sen thought to himself, but Miss Mirror's broken sword came slashing toward him again. Miss Mirror was proving why she had been such a powerful deified elite. Her sword skills far exceeded Han Sen's abilities, and she was still extremely strong. And her sword skills were uncanny. No matter how much Han Sen varied his movement patterns, he couldn't avoid the strike. It was kind of like a falsified sky attack, but this attack lacked causal powers. Pang! Han Sen had to reach out his hand to counter the attack. Like last time, his hand struck the hilt of the broken sword. Another impact thudded into his chest and sent him flying. Miss Mirror followed him like his own shadow. She kept trying to strike that girl that Han Sen held in his arms. Is this your mirror spirit body? Han Sen asked as he retreated. Yes. Even as a king class, I can kill you easily. So don't test my patience, Miss Mirror said warningly. So your mirror spirit body can only return attacks that I deal? That's not very impressive, Han Sen said. Maybe it's not amazing, but it's enough to kill you, Miss Mirror declared. You're willing to kill me? Han Sen couldn't fall back anymore. He wouldn't be able to avoid the next attack, and he couldn't counterattack Miss Mirror or the broken sword. He turned around and used his body to shield the girl from the blade. Don't think that I won't kill you, Miss Mirror said with obvious annoyance, as she stopped her sword. My lady is a princess of the Extreme King, and you are the king's sister. You are the leader of Spring Rain. Are you really going to believe in the truthfulness of this prophecy? Tell me the real reason you want to kill her, Han Sen said coolly as he eyed Miss Mirror. Miss Mirror didn't continue trying to attack him. She looked at Han Sen for a while before saying, prophecies can have very real power. Not many elites can actually predict the future, but there are some. Most notably, the very high are very skilled at prophecy. They are able to predict events in a similar manner to how the pictures on that screen seem to function. But that isn't the real reason that you want to kill her, Han Sen said, shaking his head. Miss Mirror didn't deny the accusation. Right now, her body is weak, so weak that any noble could kill her. But the powers that she displayed earlier were very strong. Even Night Wind, a deified elite of the Extreme King, was brought down in a single blow. This strangely fluctuating power reminds me of someone from an old legend. Who? Han Sen raised his eyebrow. Sacred Leader, Miss Mirror said slowly. How is that possible? Sacred Leader led so many powerful elites. If he had a weakness that was so obvious, I'm sure he would have died many times over, Han Sen replied skeptically. If Sacred Leader's body was that weak, he would have had great difficulty keeping himself alive, let alone ruling an empire. He commanded a multitude of people with incredible power. Such people would have discovered his weakness quite easily. There was no way Sacred Leader could have led Sacred for so long with such a blatant flaw. Of course, it is only a legend. Although Sacred Leader's body was sometimes weak, he was always wearing a magical set of armor. Even those closest to Sacred Leader never saw his face. Plus, he was extremely skilled with the powers of time and space. Ambushing or trapping him would have been impossible. I don't know exactly what it means, but this girl's power is very abnormal. Maybe she is somehow connected with Sacred Leader. Even if they aren't related, I must still take the precaution of killing her. I am not risking my life for her. Miss Mirror looked at Han Sen and went on to say, You should leave now, as this is your last chance. If you try to stop me, I will kill you. I won't let you escape if you oppose me here. Han Sen had questions he needed to ask the girl, many of which he desperately wanted to know the answers to. He didn't want her to die just yet. I am sorry, but I'd like for her to live, Han Sen murmured quietly. Miss Mirror said nothing. She merely slashed towards Han Sen, letting her actions speak for her. She had made a decision, and if Han Sen was going to stop her from killing the girl, she would no longer try to avoid injuring him. Based on the power in Miss Mirror's attack, it seemed that she was no longer playing around. And Han Sen knew it. He took this threat seriously. His purple-eyed butterfly kept spinning, analyzing Miss Mirror's sword skill. He could use his Dongxian area to stop Miss Mirror's area and power, but that skill was part of his identity as Dollar. If Han Sen used it in this situation, then his identity would be exposed. He didn't want to have to do that unless it was absolutely necessary. Miss Mirror's sword skills were strangely unpredictable. They were not causal sword skills, but they were still hard to dodge. As he saw Miss Mirror coming, Han Sen moved again to avoid her blade. Han Sen's movement was fast. He was faster than Miss Mirror, but somehow, the broken sword still hit him and sliced into his arm. Han Sen had the undying original Water King body, so even if his body was cut open, he could heal immediately. Normal injuries wouldn't really hurt him. When he took a strike from that broken sword, however, his original Water King body wasn't healing. It looks like this broken sword might have been quite the infamous weapon. Even the original Water King body cannot stand against it. You better think about how much you really want to stop me. The next hit won't land on your arm, Miss Mirror promised, and then she swung her sword. The sword arced like a rainbow, seeming to disappear mid-swing, like usual. I understand your sword skills. Han Sen moved, and Miss Mirror's attack hit nothing. Miss Mirror froze. She swung her sword at Han Sen again. Many sword rainbows came down, but Han Sen was like a butterfly. He fluttered back and forth, weaving between the sword rainbows. He was still holding the girl, though, and so he couldn't fight back. But he dodged each and every one of Miss Mirror's attacks. This must be a combination of your mirror area and your sword skills. Sword skills that go across the mirror world can't really be dodged. It flips the world, allowing an attack to travel through space that shouldn't exist. That keeps your opponents from discerning where a sword is coming from because they can't follow the blade along its path. It is a very powerful move, but it is useless against someone like me, Han Sen said, continuing to speak calmly as he dodged Miss Mirror's attacks. Miss Mirror finally forced herself to accept that Han Sen could see through her mirror sword skills. Continuing to attack would be pointless, so she lowered the sword. Can we actually talk now? Han Sen didn't want to fight with Miss Mirror. Doing that would lead them right into the prophesied scenario. Miss Mirror gently laughed. You think you have escaped my mirror sword skills? Have I not? Han Sen asked. If you insist on getting in my way, I will let you see the real mirror area, Miss Mirror said, before lifting the sword in her hand again. Han Sen knew Miss Mirror was an annoyingly powerful woman, so he hadn't let his guard down when she stopped attacking. I will use this sword to blind your left eye. Miss Mirror swung with the broken sword, but this time, no sword rainbows appeared, twisting sinuously through space itself. This power slammed into Han Sen with no warning. Pain shot through Han Sen's left eye like it had been stabbed by a needle. Blood squirted from it, then the eyeball exploded. Han Sen didn't even see how she had managed to get his eye. This attack will break your right eye, Miss Mirror said simply, then she slashed again with her broken sword. Han Sen focused, pushing his purple eye butterfly to the max. He still couldn't identify the power that was pushing the broken sword. A ripping sensation came from his right eye, as if it had been cut by a blade as well. It exploded like the left eye, and blood poured from the socket. Because of the broken sword's weird power, his eyes kept bleeding. The bleeding wasn't going to stop, and his blood wouldn't crystallize either. Let go of that girl, or my next strike will kill you, Miss Mirror said in a hard tone. Han Sen was now blind, but that didn't affect what he could feel. He still looked incredibly calm as he said, I should have known this was the real mirror area. My eyes reflected you and your sword, so you could break my eyes using your mirror. Now that my eyes are destroyed, what else will reflect you and your sword? How are you going to kill me? Miss Mirror sighed. You are too young. You think that's all my mirror area can do? After that, Miss Mirror raised her hand, and an old mirror appeared next to her. It was as tall as she was. That old mirror was pointed at Han Sen, and it reflected Han Sen's image. Miss Mirror thrust her blade toward the mirror. The broken sword shoved through the mirror, but the mirror wasn't broken. Han Sen felt a surge of pain in his chest, and a bloody hole appeared not far from his sternum. What a powerful mirror area! Thank you for not killing me, my lady. Han Sen knew this sword Miss Mirror wielded could have penetrated his heart or sliced his head off. I am giving you one last chance, Miss Mirror said, her voice as harsh as a winter wind. She didn't want to kill Han Senator after all. He was the master of the Mirror Spirit Eye Ring. Killing him would deal a lot of damage to the Mirror Spirit Eye Ring, which would affect Miss Mirror herself very severely. But although she really didn't want to risk damaging the ring, she wanted to kill Lady Warner even more. If Han Sen refused to walk away, then she needed to beat Han Sen badly enough that he was no longer in any condition to protect the girl. If the last picture is true, will it be me and Han Sen in front of that statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes? Miss Mirror wondered. My lady, you overestimate your mirror area's power. Twin trails of blood streaked over Han Sen's cheeks as he held Lady Warner. He looked very calm. Right? Miss Mirror snapped, looking a bit angry. She had never been this patient with anyone before. If another person had tested her temper like this, even if they were deified, she would have struck them down. She kept enduring Han Sen's stubbornness and rudeness, but he obviously didn't appreciate that she was going easy on him. It was very frustrating for Miss Mirror. She used her sword to slash at the mirror. Han Sen moved the moment Miss Mirror swung the broken sword. Her broken sword entered the mirror, but it couldn't hurt Han Sen this time. Your mirror area can assault my shadow within the mirror you create. Since that shadow is linked to my real body, you can hurt me. But that all depends on you being able to touch my shadow. My shadow in the mirror, however, moves with me. I can control it, allowing it to dodge your broken sword, Han Sen said. You are smart. You have learned much about my mirror area in such a short amount of time, Miss Mirror complimented him. Her face remained impassive. But even if you do know that, so what? The mirror world is the opposite of our world. You can control your shadow, but it won't move as naturally as your own body, because every move you make in this world will be reversed in the mirror. And on top of that, you have been blinded. You cannot see your shadow in the mirror, so how do you expect that you will be able to dodge me? Try to attack me again, and you will see for yourself how well I can still dodge. Han Sen's composed expression hadn't changed. Clearly, Miss Mirror wasn't fond of Han Sen's attitude. She slashed her sword in the direction of the mirror with one of her rainbows. The power of the attack headed for Han Sen's shadow in the mirror. Han Sen needed to control his movement, guiding his shadow around the incoming attack. Han Sen's shadow responded instantly to his every movement, but the reversal of the mirror made it very difficult to control. Normal people used mirrors to do their makeup or brush their hair. When performing a task that required a person to make extremely precise movements, people who weren't very experienced with working in mirrors would often make mistakes. Han Sen wasn't doing anything as simple as brushing his hair, though. He was using a mirror to fight for his life. Han Sen had to control his reflection to avoid Miss Mirror's scary attacks. It would be a difficult task at the best of times, and doing so while blinded and injured would be nearly impossible. But Miss Mirror, despite running her sword skills at full power, was failing to inflict any more damage on Han Sen's reflection. She couldn't land a single strike. How is he doing this? Miss Mirror wondered, her shock etched deep into her face. She knew how hard this had to be, especially since Han Sen had only just become a king. She would never have expected that Han Sen would be able to neutralize her sword skills. After all, she had the experience of a deified. She wasn't some ordinary king-class enemy to him. Now Han Sen could fight her face to face, and he could control the shadow in the mirror with unbelievable proficiency. She missed each and every attack. Through all of this, though, the most amazing thing was that Han Sen was blind. It was hard to imagine how strong his other senses must be to accomplish a feat such as this. Miss Mirror couldn't hurt his reflection, and so her sword stopped moving. "My lady, it looks like you cannot hurt me," Han Sen said. Miss Mirror was no longer angry. She had underestimated Han Sen, who was a king. She never thought Han Sen would become an actual threat to her. But now, Han Sen's performance had revealed him as just that, an enemy who could rival her power. He wasn't just some random king she could slay on a whim. "You are very strong. A leftover of the crystallizers is this capable? That is incredibly rare. If it was possible to avoid being your enemy, I would choose to do so," Miss Mirror said, looking at Han Sen with newfound respect. "I don't want to be your enemy, either. Why don't we re-establish our bonds of cooperation and work to rid ourselves of the red-eye plague?" Han Sen smiled. "We will, of course. But she must die first," Miss Mirror said. The muscles in her jaw tightened, and a weird light shimmered. A scary mirror area appeared. Han Sen immediately realized he was now trapped in a mirror maze. Mirrors appeared everywhere he looked. Even the ground and the sky above were just mirror images. Han Sen's reflection was in every mirror, as if thousands of Han Sens were there. The mirrors reflected each other, creating reflections of Han Sen that stretched back into infinity. Han Sen's face changed. Since there were so many reflections, Miss Mirror could strike him with far greater ease now. Han Sen needed to stop her from hitting any one of those reflections. Defending himself had become a much more difficult task now, and it would be even harder to break the old mirrors now, too. He didn't know if those old mirrors could be broken, but even if they could break, the mirrors would only shatter and create countless more reflections in the shards. Han Sen would be in even more danger, then. "Still confident that you can dodge my attacks?" Miss Mirror asked as she hung in the center of the mirror area. "Let's give it a try. Maybe I can make it work." Han Sen shrugged. "You are so stubborn," Miss Mirror grunted. With a swing of the broken sword, sword rainbows came to life and went flying at Han Sen through the mirrors. There were too many reflections in the mirrors, and Miss Mirror continued to attack without pause or hesitation. Countless reflections would be involved in every single evasion that was required. Han Sen's heart leaped. He summoned Jade Skin and channeled as much power into it as he could. His body became icy jade. His mind opened, and his Jade Skin area appeared. His expression focused, Han Sen jumped, and all of his reflections avoided the incoming sword strike. At the same time, his Jade Skin area covered all of the old mirrors. Frost spread over the surface of every single mirror. "That's useless. Your reflections in the ice are susceptible to my strikes, so I can still use them to kill you." Miss Mirror slashed towards one of the frozen-over mirrors. "The ice won't work? It looks like this is it then."
Han Sen sighed.
Han Sen withdrew his Jade Skin area, pulling it all back into his body. Miss Mirror's sword came for one of Han Sen's reflections again, but this time, Han Sen didn't dodge. Dong, dong, dong. Miss Mirror's sword struck all of Han Sen's reflections, but Han Sen just stood where he was. He wasn't bleeding, and not a single wound appeared across his body. It was like he was a jade statue, resolute and still. Not even dust will tarnish my jade skin, Miss Mirror. My body is my body. It is mine alone, and nothing in this world will change that. Even if you break all my reflections, you cannot hurt me. Han Sen held Lady Warner while he spoke, his voice frosty. Miss Mirror's rainbow powers kept swinging. They broke many of the reflections in the mirrors, but Han Sen's body remained completely undamaged. My lady, if you still had a deified body, it is safe to say that my jade skin wouldn't be able to endure your powerful sword strikes. But now, you aren't too different from me. You are a first-tier king-class opponent. Unless you strike me with the broken sword, hitting my reflections isn't going to hurt me, Han Sen said. So what? It's actually quite relieving that I don't have to worry about striking you. I will just hit the woman instead. Even if you hide her behind you, you cannot protect her shadow from me, Miss Mirror pronounced as she raised her broken sword again. My lady, you must have heard what I just said, Han Sen said, as he suddenly looked at Miss Mirror.
What?
Miss Mirror asked. We are the same level as kings. Han Sen raised his fists. The ice jade around his fists became a godlight and flashed toward Miss Mirror. Miss Mirror's heart jumped, and an old mirror formed in front of her. She wanted to reflect the jade skin godlight back on its wielder, but the godlight wasn't a simple attack power. It was a power for sealing. The icy light suddenly wrapped a binding seal around Miss Mirror and the old mirror, resolving into the shape of a giant ice cube. Miss Mirror, I'm going on ahead. If I can break the red-eye power, I will come back for you. Han Sen looked at Miss Mirror's broken sword, but he decided not to take it with him. He simply resettled his arms a little more comfortably around Warner and headed back into the broken city. Even if the prophecy was true, it would be fulfilled by him and the girl now. Their current situation still aligned with the sixth picture of the mural they had discovered. But the broken city in front of them had yet to be cleared. The place was covered in broken stone and debris, and since Night Wind was no longer there to make a path for them, Han Sen had to do it. While carrying the girl, he broke the stones himself. He didn't have substance chains like Night Wind, so he was unable to clear a wide area. Instead, he broke a path just wide enough for him to slip through while still carrying the girl. He tried to travel as fast as he could. Han Sen felt as if the red-eye power wasn't affecting him as much, which might or might not have been because his eyes were broken. He still felt the urge to move in a certain direction, but it wasn't that strong. He wasn't sure what sort of weapon that broken sword had been, but Han Sen's injured eyes weren't healing with Jadeskin's power. But Han Sen cared little about that. It didn't matter to him if he had eyes right now. He could take the time to heal when he got out of there. Han Sen hadn't been gone for long with the ice sealing Miss Mirror made a groaning noise. Cracks appeared across its surface, and a second later, the ice cube shattered. Miss Mirror was free. Miss Mirror looked in the direction that Han Sen had escaped. Her expression was conflicted, but a while later, she sighed. I hope he can break the red-eye curse. Miss Mirror had realized something, and although she didn't want to think about it, she knew she had to. Unless she became deified again, it wouldn't be possible for her to defeat Han Sen at his current level. And so, if Han Sen couldn't find and destroy the source of the red-eye curse, all was lost. Perhaps the prophecy would come true, too, and one of them would die. We might be the same level, but I can't compete with you. I hope when you are deified, you will have the courage to face me in the same way. Miss Mirror sat on a rock near the entrance to the cave leading into the city. She cast a Geno art to block the addiction-like draw of the red-eye power, and she sat there awaiting Han Sen's result. Han Sen carried Lady Warner forward, breaking rocks as he went. He didn't encounter anything weird this time, but after 2 hours of travel, the rocks in front of him were becoming easier to move. When Han Sen moved the next pile of rubble out of his way, he realized that there was open air behind it. Han Sen stood before the entrance to a hall, and in that hall, there was a statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. It looked exactly the same as the one they had seen previously, but this statue was 1,000 meters tall, far bigger than the one he had seen before. The moment Han Sen entered the hall, he could feel the statue staring at him. Han Sen's blinded eyes suddenly burned. The damage in his eyes began to repair itself, and in seconds, and he was able to see again. Even with no mirror, Han Sen could feel that his eyes were shining with red light. The 4 pupils in his eyes were now like 4 red suns. That feeling of addiction had suddenly grown by orders of magnitude. Han Sen felt like a moth drawn to a flame. He wanted nothing more than to go to that statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. Han Sen's will was really strong, but even he was wavering under the draw of the statue. It was like the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes was his final home. He wanted so badly to go into it. "Come, come," a demonic voice whispered from the statue. It was beckoning him over. Although Han Sen tried to control his will, his feet began stepping forward of their own volition. The call couldn't go unheeded, it seemed. He was slowly walking towards the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. Boom! Without hesitation, Han Sen deployed his super god spirit body. A glowing light spread in his eyes. It smothered the red and made his entire eyes turn white. When Han Sen last used his super god spirit body, he had been interrupted by water before it could remove the red color from his eyes. But now that he had unleashed it, the red eyes were gone. The white light burned across Han Sen like a cleansing flame. Han Sen's body hung in the air, white and godlike. He looked down on that giant statue with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. There were red eyes on one of the statue's pairs of hands, and those hands moved with Han Sen's body. That eye on the statue was like a demon, tracing Han Sen's movements. But under the influence of his super god spirit mode, the power of the eyes didn't work on Han. Senator Han Sen gathered up his power to use super spank. He wanted to see if he could break the demon-looking eye upon the statue. But before Han Sen struck, he felt his super god spirit body's power begin to fade. It suddenly disappeared and returned to his Geno core. What is this? Han Sen was shocked. The power had begun to fade from his back, and that was where Lady Warner was. The super god spirit body's power disappeared. The power of the statue landed on Han Sen, and it suddenly turned his eyes back into those red ones. Once more, Han Sen felt like a moth drawn to a flame. It was stronger than last time, too. His body was pulled uncontrollably toward the statue. This is bad. Now that Warner has no power, why would my super god spirit body be affected by her? Han Sen was in shock. Warner was still in her comatose state, but Han Sen tossed her body away from him. She landed against the ground some distance away, but luckily, Han Sen had used some of his power to cushion her landing. Instead of slamming into the ground like a bag of rocks, Warner slid smoothly through the air and landed softly, almost silently, on the ground. Han Sen wanted to see if having some distance between himself and Warner would allow him to fully activate and maintain his super god spirit body. After tossing Warner aside, Han Sen redeployed his super god spirit body. White light surrounded him once again, glowing from his hair and eyes. His red eyes vanished in a sea of white, just like they had on his previous attempt. But this time, Han Sen managed to keep his super god spirit body going, and his power didn't fade. Was Warner really causing my power to disappear? What's going on? How is it possible for her to affect my super god spirit body? Han Sen looked at Warner with shock. He noticed that her own body was glowing with gold light. Her eyes and hair were turning gold. Han Sen didn't have time to worry about that at the moment, though. He just focused on using super spank. He threw his fist toward the eye on the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes to see if he could break it. But the moment Han Sen got close, a weird glow rose around the statue. The statue seemed to be gathering up a substance chain of red light, and then the light lashed out at Han Sen. Han Sen's super god spirit body ignored blood light coming for him. The blood light went straight through him like he didn't even exist, like he was some sort of phantom. But Han Sen punched the statue's eye, releasing an explosion of force. The shockwave shoved Han Sen's body back, but the super spank strike was unable to destroy the eye. This is harder than that weird deified bug. Even the thought made Han Sen feel a cold dread. Part of him had expected this result, though. The confirmation simply disappointed him. He couldn't break the statue. That meant he couldn't unlock the secrets of the red eye power. But it also wouldn't affect him because he had the super god spirit body. But if anyone else was infected with the red-eye condition, there was nothing he could do. Han Sen turned around and began walking away. He needed to leave the broken city, first and foremost. But then, the statue suddenly moved. Its enormous form suddenly stood fully erect, and it looked down on Han Sen with abject hatred. The entire hall shook as the statue rose to its full height. "It is alive." Han Sen wasn't surprised. He jumped forward and tried to reach Wanner. But he then saw Wanner's body lift itself off the ground. Her hair and eyes had turned blonde, and she now looked exactly as she had appeared when Han Sen first saw her. Her eyes were open, but they were glazed and unfocused. The statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes stepped forward, sending one of its demon-like hands down to slap Han Senator. It paused above him, though, and it began to shine. The blonde-haired Wanner teleported in front of the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes, hovering in the air directly in front of its face. She waved her hand and cut its head off. Boom! The giant stone head fell onto the floor of the hall, creating a good-sized crater where it slammed into the floor. Han Sen was frozen. Wanner had such a weak body, but after she turned golden, her power became truly frightening. Its magnitude was difficult to believe. This was completely different from what the sixth image of the mural had depicted, too. The sixth picture showed one person on the floor and another person praying to the complete statue. But while the head had been cut off, the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes did not fall. Its body began to writhe, and all of its 1,000 arms were moving. The red eye in each of its hands began to glow, and that hellish glow covered the hall from one end to the other. Countless red substance chains emerged and slithered toward Wanner's body. Wanner's power was incredible, but her body was solid and could therefore be injured. She didn't have the invincible features of Han Sen's super god spirit body. Countless substance chains tangled around Wanner's body, and a cruel grin suddenly played across the mouth of the statue head on the floor. It flew up and opened its mouth, trying to consume Wanner. Han Sen's heart leaped. He stepped forward to help Wanner, but the golden light coming from Wanner's body intensified, and the rest of the chains suddenly melted. She raised a single hand and pressed it against the statue's head, and then, the statue's head exploded like fireworks. The head was shattered, but the statue wasn't dead. It seemed to be quite shocked, though. It turned its giant body around to run away. Wanner's blonde-haired form flashed, and she reappeared beside the statue. She reached out and planted her hands firmly on the statue's body. Pang! The whole statue exploded. The giant body was reduced to a heap of rubble, and its arms lay scattered about. Too strong. Han Sen couldn't help but compliment her display of power. Strength like that could destroy almost anything. Even that powerful statue had been killed in scant moments. Most of the arms that fell to the floor of the hall were now broken, and the eyes that they held had been destroyed. Even those that hadn't been outright destroyed were bleeding profusely. They would die soon. The arms writhed on the floor in a sickening fashion, like deadly snakes. But one broken eyeball did shoot away from its attendant hand. It became a bloodlight as it tried to escape the hall. Han Sen stood next to the exit of the hall, and he watched that blood eye come. He used Super Spank to smack it. There was a loud squelching noise as he smacked it, and the jelly of the eyeball sprayed out as the thing fell to the floor. When the eyeball ruptured, the writhing pieces of the statue all stopped. It was like a heap of rubble now, and nothing more. Mutant deified xenogeneic hunted. Blood Eye Evil God. Mutant xenogeneic gene found. Obtained Blood Eye Evil God Beast Soul. When Han Sen heard the announcement, he was shocked. He hadn't even realized what he was about to do when he struck the eyeball. He just didn't want it to escape. He hadn't thought there'd be a reward, especially a reward on such a scale. Before Han Sen had time to examine the Blood Eye Evil God's Beast Soul, the blonde-haired Wanner teleported over to him. Her golden eyes looked in Han Sen's direction, but they had so little focus that he couldn't tell if she was actually looking at him. Then Wanner's hand drifted forward to pat Han Sen on the head. This shocked Han Senator. He suddenly realized that when Wanner had grabbed his neck, she had wanted to kill him. But something else had happened instead. As Wanner's hand came from, an overwhelming sense of danger weighed on Han Sen's shoulders. The feeling was so strong it was almost suffocating. Warner struck too fast for Han Sen to dodge. His fast reflexes moved his head far enough back that she didn't strike him directly, but her fingertips still tore into his face. 3 deep gashes were torn into Han Sen's face. The clefts were so deep that his skull became visible through them. Han Sen was shocked. He was still in his super god spirit body mode, but Warner's fingers had damaged him anyway. This was the first time something of the sort had ever happened. Luckily, he managed to dodge most of her attack. Otherwise, his entire head would have split open like a cut watermelon. Han Sen instinctually started to return to the sanctuaries. His super god spirit body couldn't block Warner's power if she chose to attack him again, so he couldn't escape by traditional means if she wanted to fight him. But Warner didn't attack him again. She stood where she was, unmoving. She looked at the blood on her fingers, which was Han Sen's blood. A little life came back to her eyes, and her golden power began to fade. Do we affect each other? Han Sen thought happily. He gritted his teeth and grabbed Warner's arm. He examined her. As Warner's body came closer to Han Sen, her gold color faded much faster. When he saw that Warner wasn't resisting, Han Sen pulled her into his arms. When their bodies were in physical contact, Warner's golden power vanished completely. Her eyes looked fully cognizant for the first time. Good brother, it's so nice to have you here, Warner mumbled against Han Sen's chest. She was lying forward against him, and she slowly closed her eyes. After she spoke, Warner's body went soft. Her consciousness drifted away as it had before. Han Sen frowned and looked at the girl in his arms. Her life force was weaker than it had been the previous time, when she was in a coma. Now, her life force was like that of a dying old woman. She no longer had the vitality of a teenage lady. Does this mean that using the golden power cost her the strength of her life force? Han Sen looked at the lady thoughtfully as a variety of emotions shifted across her expression. This girl was the only person Han Sen had ever encountered who could threaten him in his super god spirit body mode. It might have been a good idea to get rid of her, but there were so many unknowns about the girl. A lot of questions had been raised by her existence, and she did seem to harbor some sort of connection to Han Senator. He really needed to figure out what was going on here. As long as she is next to me, she can't make use of that scary power. So, I suppose I don't have to be too afraid. I need to figure out what she is before I do anything drastic. Han Sen sighed, set the girl down, and then looked across the hall. The hall had only been home to the statue, and Han Sen looked around for a while, but he didn't find anything useful there. And the materials that composed the hall were too tough to be broken through, so Han Sen couldn't search any further. Han Sen did find a piece of red crystal that was around the size of his hand, though. It was inside the remains of the red eyeball. He put it in his pocket, then went back the way he had come. Now that the statue has been destroyed, I wonder if the red eye condition is still in effect. Han Sen went back the way he had come to take a look, but when he reached the place that he had left Miss Mirror, he didn't see her there. Did she go back to camp? That really isn't her style. Han Sen frowned, then began walking a little faster. Even if the red-eye power infecting Miss Mirror had vanished, she wouldn't simply go home. She would have stayed where she was and waited for Han Sen to return so she could grill him thoroughly over what had happened. Plus, the pieces of the shattered tree egg were still lying around. If Miss Mirror had decided to leave, she would have at least taken the pieces of the tree egg with her. They were a valuable treasure. It's good that she is gone then. That means all of these tree egg shards are mine. Han Sen picked up a piece and started to put it away. As he did, he noticed how nice the chunk of egg smelled. But there didn't seem to be any life force within the pieces of egg. And furthermore, there was no semblance of power. This definitely wasn't what Han Sen had expected. No wonder Miss Mirror left these behind. They're already useless. Did Warner absorb the powers of the tree egg while she was inside it? Han Sen guessed. He couldn't think of any other explanations. Han Sen kept walking back the way he had come. He didn't encounter any more trouble. Warner was still in her coma, and her body was so weak that it looked like the final tether of her life would break at any second. Han Sen didn't know why the girl had been reduced to such a condition. If this continued, she wouldn't last long. Strangely, though, Han Sen found no evidence of the wall of pictures on his return trip. The wall seemed to have just vanished into thin air, without a trace. Han Sen continued walking back toward camp, and when the first statue came into view, he froze. Miss Mirror was lying in front of the statue, and a woman was kneeling beside her. The woman was praying to the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. It was one of the four kings. It was Red Cloud. The scene before him was the same as the sixth picture depicted on the screen's mural. It gave Han Sen a chill. What is going on? Han Sen was confused. He looked at Red Cloud and Miss Mirror, unsure what was happening. Miss Mirror's presence was still there. She wasn't dead, but she seemed to be badly wounded as she lay on the ground. She obviously wasn't doing well. Red Cloud knelt before the statue like a sincere believer. Her eyes were closed and her hands were folded as she prayed. No way. Red Cloud never saw the statue. And didn't Miss Mirror tell her to watch over the base? Why is she here? Did the red-eye power become contagious? That means Bauer and Ning Yu are in danger. Anxiety grew in the pit of Han Sen's stomach, and he started jogging forward. Before Han Sen reached the statue, Red Cloud opened her eyes. Her eyes were the color of blood, and they contained 2 pupils each. That was the look people had when they were stricken with the power of the blood-eye evil god. Upon seeing Han Sen, Red Cloud looked murderous. She picked up the broken sword, but instead of striking Han Sen, she turned and thrust the broken blade into Miss Mirror's chest. Han Sen's heart jumped, and he used his jade skin area to freeze Red Cloud. Red Cloud was only king class, so she was unable to defeat Han's senator. The red-eye powers were running through her too strongly for her to know what she was doing. She couldn't block Han Sen's power, and so she ended up frozen. Han Sen walked up to Miss Mirror. He crouched, looked at her, and smiled. Miss Mirror, why are you lying around at a time like this? Use your sword to break the statue, Miss Mirror said quietly through gritted teeth. Her eyes were still a deep red. Han Sen could feel that the statue still had that red-eye power, but it wasn't as strong as the statue Warner had destroyed earlier. It didn't make him want to run deep into the city. It just wanted him to go to the statue itself. Clearly, although the Blood-Eye Evil God had been killed, this statue still had some of that Blood-Eye Evil God power. Han Sen pulled the broken sword out of Red Cloud's hand and swung it across the face of the statue. A deep furrow was gouged into the statue's face, and blood started to leak from it. The statue didn't move, however. The statue wasn't as hard as Han Sen had expected, though. After a few more of those strikes, the stone statue's head fell off. The severed neck of the statue gushed blood, but it was just a statue. Where the blood came from, Han Sen had no idea. Strangely, once Han Sen cut off the head of the statue, it didn't behave like the Blood-Eye Evil God had upon being decapitated. Instead of getting stronger or fighting back, it simply died. Han Sen examined the statue again to confirm what he thought he saw. The statue was dying. It dried up like a withered plant. It looked somewhat like a bergamot flower. The stalk and its flowers were dark red. The stone head that had been lopped off was the plant's largest blossom. It is a plant, Han Sen remarked in surprise. He didn't hear any killing announcement, which made him doubt that the plant was actually a creature. After the flower died, Miss Mirror's red eyes started to fade. It looked like the red-eye powers were finally gone. Miss Mirror, however, was too injured to rejoice. She remained on the ground, unable to rise. Han Sen put an arm around her back and helped her sit up. What happened? Why is Red Cloud here? Why are you hurt? Miss Mirror opened her mouth but struggled to speak. Something happened back at base camp. We need to go back now. When Han Sen heard that, his face turned gray. Without asking any further questions, he simply picked up Miss Mirror. With her in one arm and Lady Warner in the other, he sprinted back to the stone fields. When they reached what was left of the base, their hearts sank. What Han Sen saw sickened him. The base had become a ruin and been painted red with the blood and gore of its inhabitants. No one was left alive. Miss Mirror looked terrible. A third of Spring Rain's members had been brought there, and now they were all gone. Furthermore, one of the four kings was dead, and Red Cloud had been reduced to a king-class soldier. Miss Mirror had lost so much. Han Sen's face looked awfully glum, too. He feared Ning Yu and Bauer might have been killed in the carnage. Dad? Han Sen turned to begin searching through the rubble of the ruin, But all of a sudden, Bauer emerged over the top of one heap. It was like a mountaintop. She jumped onto Han Sen's chest and wrapped her small arms tightly around his neck. Bauer! Bauer was okay, and as she clung to his neck, Ningyu and Falling Leaf came over the rubble too. Han Sen was so overjoyed that he dropped Miss Mirror to wrap his arms around Bauer. Arg! Miss Mirror was too injured to catch herself, and she hit the ground hard. She coughed up some blood and looked rather angered at being suddenly dropped. Miss Mirror! Falling Leaf ran over to pick Miss Mirror up. She imbued her superior with some of her healing powers. Don't bother, I am too injured for that. I won't heal quickly regardless, so just tell me what happened, Miss Mirror said abruptly, wiping some of the blood from her mouth. Falling Leaf told her everything that had transpired, but for some reason, she left out the part with the white-haired man and the conversation he had shared with Bauer. She also left out the bit regarding the little bird becoming a fiery phoenix. She only said that, after the white-haired man appeared, the people of the base went crazy. They all started killing each other until none of them remained. But for some reason, a few of them had been unaffected. They were able to escape amidst the chaos. That white-haired man, where did he come from? Miss Mirror asked with a frown. I don't know. When we first saw him, he was already walking around the base and everyone was going insane, Falling Leaf said with a shake of her head. Miss Mirror suddenly had a thought, and she turned her gaze back to Falling Leaf. That stone. Go and see if the stone is still there. We've already looked, Falling Leaf answered. The stone is gone. Miss Mirror sighed and said, Go find Red Cloud and bring her back here. We will have to wait for reinforcements to arrive. Han Sen handed the broken sword to Falling Leaf. She went to the stone fields and brought the frozen Red Cloud back. Although the red-eye power had vanished from the rest of them, Red Cloud was still crazed, and her eyes were still clouded with that shade of red. After she was released, she again tried to attack everyone around. Han Sen had to freeze her once more. When the reinforcements came, he was going to let them deal with it. As for Miss Mirror, Han Sen knew why she had been injured so badly. Han Sen had taken too long, and Miss Mirror had been reaching the limits of her ability to withstand the red-eye power. Then the feelings of addiction had suddenly vanished. Miss Mirror thought Han Sen had sorted out the red-eye problem, and so she felt relieved. But just as she was starting to relax, that addicted feeling washed over her again, and this time it was a few hundred times stronger. The attraction drew Miss Mirror back toward the original statue, and Miss Mirror could no longer resist it. Miss Mirror's mind was still quite clear, but her will was no longer strong enough to control the urge. When she approached the statue, she noticed that Red Cloud had come there, too. Miss Mirror was thrilled for a moment, as she thought Red Cloud might be able to use the broken sword to break the statue. But Red Cloud was crazy, and she attacked Miss Mirror as soon as she saw her. Miss Mirror couldn't control her own body well enough to fight Red Cloud, and so Red Cloud beat her to the brink of death. Miss Mirror had been left lying on the ground, struggling to remain conscious. What happened next chilled Miss Mirror's blood, though. Red Cloud bowed before the statue and began praying. From what Miss Mirror could understand, Red Cloud wanted to use her as some sort of offering. Han Sen had come in time, thank God. If he hadn't, Miss Mirror would have been killed. Han Sen thought this was very suspicious, too. He didn't fully understand what was going on. Han Sen kept Wanner close. If she was any distance at all from Han Sen, her eyes and hair would start to turn gold. The further away from him she was, the faster she would turn. Han Sen experimented with it a little. Wanner couldn't be 10 meters away from him. Otherwise, even in her coma-like state, her hair would turn gold. And when Wanner was within 10 meters of Han Sen, his ability to use his super god spirit power was greatly diminished. The power would begin to fade as soon as he summoned it. The closer to Wanner he was, the faster it faded. Clearly, the two of them had a dramatic effect on each other. Luckily, though, the effect only limited Han Sen's super god spirit body. His other powers remained intact. Han Sen asked Miss Mirror not to say anything about Wanner. Han Sen didn't think Miss Mirror would agree to his request, so it was a surprise for him when she actually assented. She did, however, have a condition of her own regarding the secret. What? You want me to be an offering? Han Sen looked at Miss Mirror with wide eyes. As far as the extreme king are concerned, I brought you here to dig up the ruin of a god's battleground. By doing so, I wanted you to fade from the vision of the royal children, Miss Mirror said calmly. She was reclining on the bed where they had placed her. This is the only reason your pretense of being Prince 16 has lasted this long. But now, this catastrophe with the statues has killed all my people and left you alive. I don't think I will be able to buy you a lot of time. My brother will throw all his resources into investigating you, and you have nowhere to turn. The only thing we can do to keep you alive is to perform a sacrifice. Enter the holy temple to become a devotee. Once you gain the blessing of the extreme king, your survival will be ensured. I'm going to the holy temple? What does that mean, exactly? Han Sen frowned. The holy temple is where the extreme king makes sacrifices to their god. Every generation must have a sacrificed king. They offer themselves to the god and become a devotee. They serve the god inside the holy temple forever. After pausing, Miss Mirror said, only someone with the blood of the extreme king can earn the blessing of the god. Therefore, a crystallizer shouldn't be capable of becoming a devotee. If you can, though, that will prove you really are Prince 16. At that point, no one will be able to dispel your lie. Even if someone was suspicious, not even King Bai could randomly waltz in and do whatever he pleased. No one would be able to investigate you. So I'd be practically sentenced to life in jail? Han Sen frowned. Which would you prefer, incarceration or death? Even if you left now, where would you go? Do you really think Isha or Kong Fei can protect you? Let me tell you this now. This universe is big, but if it is confirmed that you killed Prince 16, there is nowhere you can go to escape the wrath that will be set upon you. In order to survive, you would have to be stronger than the leagues of deifieds that belong to the extreme king. And I will be one of them, Miss Mirror said emotionlessly. Even if I want to go to the extreme king's holy temple, I don't have the blood of the extreme king. How would I even gain the approval of this god? Han Sen said, it should be possible with the help of my mirror spirit eye ring. Plus, you do have the original Water King body that you got from Bai Yi. Getting the god's approval shouldn't be too difficult. Miss Mirror paused and said, furthermore, going to the holy temple isn't entirely like being sent to jail. While you may not be able to exit the temple, you can still visit the core area. With the resources you earn in the core area, you can definitely become half-deified. Miss Mirror then hesitated. After a while, she went on to say, also, there are benefits to becoming a devotee. Although you can never leave the holy temple, you will have the opportunity to bathe in the temple's godlight. Your genes will be strengthened, and you will have an easier time becoming deified. Is this my only chance of surviving? Han Sen asked quietly. Unless you want a universe-wide APB issued by the Extreme King, yes. This is pretty much the only option. Once you become a devotee, the other royal children won't be hostile to you. And so, you'll have less trouble, Miss Mirror said. Even if I wanted to try entering the temple, what are they going to do? Han Sen pointed at Bauer and the unconscious Warner, who were a little further away. The holy temple isn't a place just anyone can go. Even the royal children must meet certain qualifications before they can become devotees. I can help you get qualified, but in regards to them, they will have to stay on Planet Water Zone. After pausing, Miss Mirror said, the best thing for them is to disappear. Otherwise, they may face scrutiny and fall under investigation themselves. Through them, things could unravel. Of course, if you insist on them staying, I can think of a way or two to help them. When Han Sen heard this, he frowned. Bauer and Ning Yu could go back to Planet Eclipse. They had the little red bird to protect them, after all. But there was no way that Warner could leave Han Senator if she woke up. She'd become a blonde time bomb. Warner's life force was super weak right now. If she went on a rampage again, she would die. Han Sen wanted to ask her many things, so he needed her alive until he could talk to her. Let me think about it. Han Sen knew Miss Mirror would continue trying to convince him, so he continued on to say, do you think the statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes in Do God City and that prophetic screen are connected to the missing rock we first dug up? Han Sen had already gotten the full scoop on the white-haired man from Bauer and Ning Yu, but Bauer claimed she didn't know who he was. I don't know. Everything in Do God City is a mystery, and everything we find seems to tie back to yet another myth. My brother will probably send someone else here to continue excavation efforts. I believe answers will one day come, Miss Mirror said. Han Sen went silent. As a king, he was simply too weak. If he became deified, then he'd be qualified to fully explore God City. It was a very scary place, and he was just too weak to be there in his current state. Make a decision soon. You are running out of time, Miss Mirror said. Then, she stopped talking. She was trying to convince Han Sen, not because Han Sen had the mirror spirit ring, but because he had selected to let her live after their fight in the cave. He had the chance to kill her, but he showed her mercy. And on top of that, he saved her from Red Cloud. Otherwise, she never would have done all this for Han Sen. Helping Han Sen enter the Holy Temple as a devotee would break basically every law that her people had. Plus, she was the investigator king by had specifically chosen to examine Han Sen. Thanks. Han Sen walked over to Warner. He looked down at the girl, wondering what he should do with her. Going to the Holy Temple was clearly the safest choice, but that meant he would be giving up on the girl's secrets. Maybe Warner would wake up before backup arrived? Warner seemed too weak for that, though. Han Sen tried many different tricks and powers to reinforce her life force or to get her to wake up, but nothing seemed to work. Han Sen didn't dare use more than a trickle of his power. He didn't want to accidentally kill Warner. Her body was too weak, so using any significant force on her could be deadly. Ugh, this is giving me a headache. If I don't enter the Holy Temple, I'll have to go on the run. Then, it won't just be the Extreme King after me. Any race related to the Extreme King or seeking their favor will be hunting me. Escaping on my own will be way too hard, Han Sen thought with a frown. If Han Sen escaped, he wouldn't just be affecting himself. It would affect the lives of his friends on planet Eclipse, and it might even blow back on Isha. If I was to leave, would you help me? Han Sen looked at Miss Mirror. I am an Extreme King, Miss Mirror said icily. Han Sen laughed and asked, if I left now, would it affect Isha? That is a question you should ask Isha. It would be her decision. Miss Mirror's eyes flicked down. She seemed to know Han Sen's true decision. Han Sen asked Miss Mirror to contact Isha. He wouldn't use his own phone because, if he decided to run, all of his conversations after this day would be thoroughly examined. Han Sen explained his situation to Isha completely, and Isha listened intently. She didn't say a word until Han Sen finished telling her the entire story. When Isha spoke, all she said were 4 words. Go to Sky Palace. Isha then immediately hung up. With that, Han Sen was able to make up his mind. He handed the phone back to Miss Mirror, smiled, and said, Thank you for taking care of me all this time, my lady. I hope we can meet again someday. I'm afraid that won't be possible, but if you die, I will light a candle in your honor, Miss Mirror said emotionlessly. If my death earns a lit candle from you, I will consider myself eternally blessed, Han Sen said. He looked at Miss Mirror and said, I actually still have one more request to make. I was hoping that my lady would take care of my blood Kirin. If you're willing to, you can use it for yourself. I will remember the kindness you have done me. That blood Kirin is quite an angry beast. I don't think it will follow the commands if another, Miss Mirror said. Controlling it isn't difficult. You just need to use this item to find him, and then he will listen to you. Han Sen brought something out for Miss Mirror. I guess I won't refuse the service of a half-deified. Miss Mirror accepted the item, looked at Han Sen, and asked, You really have made the decision to flee? You need to think about this carefully. Even if Sky Palace was willing to defy the Extreme King and take you in, your journey there would be a hellish one. You might not even get there alive. This is my life. I could go to the Holy Temple and survive, but I would spend my life in a prison. For someone like me, that existence would be worse than death. I would rather take a gamble that still leaves me a small chance of freedom, Han Sen said. Although his words weren't entirely honest, Han Sen was explaining one of his primary reasons for refusing to go to the Holy Temple. Then you should go. I hope you survive a few more days. If my guess is correct, reinforcements will arrive here in 40 hours. And I will have to report your situation to my supervisor. Miss Mirror didn't pretend that she would support Han Sen more than she really would just because she was weaker than him now. That just wasn't her personality. Goodbye, my lady. Please report that I'm going to Sky Palace. Han Sen bowed. He picked up the unconscious Wanner and took Bauer with him as he departed. Seeing Han Sen flee the xenogeneic space with Bauer, a strange expression crossed Falling Leaf's face. Miss Mirror, has he really chosen to depart the Extreme King? It is very surprising, but it doesn't surprise me that a brave man like him has made such a choice. Despite Miss Mirror's words, her face looked conflicted. Falling Leaf hesitated for a moment, but ultimately asked, "Can he escape this?" "No, he cannot," Miss Mirror answered with certainty, for that was what she believed. Han Sen was smart, but no matter how smart he was just a first-tier king. Even if he was deified, the furious hordes of Extreme King would still bring him down. It was only a matter of time. Isha wanted Han Sen to go to Sky Palace because the sky had the backing of the Very High. If they were willing to protect Han Sen, then the Extreme King wouldn't simply be able to enter Sky Palace and kill whomever they pleased. But Sky Palace might not protect Han Senator, and even if they agreed to take him in, the trip to get to Sky Palace would be very dangerous for him. After an hour, Miss Mirror called King Bai's phone. "Brother, I have confirmed that he is indeed Han Senator. He has fled the xenogeneic space, and he is headed for Sky Palace." After he left the xenogeneic space, Han Sen waved his hand and sent a white crystal flying out in front of him. It expanded until it became a giant white whale. It was a technological marvel of the ancient crystallizers. It was as powerful as a deified treasure, and it was Han Sen's primary hope of escaping his predicament. With the white whale, he would be able to travel through space for a long time without needing to stop on any other planets along the way. "Han Sen, are we really going to escape? We should go and reason with them. Perhaps they will forgive us." Ningyu was going to cry. A man never looks back. Han Sen drove the white whale forward. He looked excited and wholly unafraid. "A man never looks back," Bauer repeated in excitement, pumping her fists. "I'm not a big man. I'm a small woman. Let me out. I will beg them for their forgiveness. They will forgive me. They will forgive me because I am a pitiful woman." Ningyu sobbed as she banged on the hatch. Then, she sat with her back to the door. She started to cry hopelessly. Her little green sword remained silently at her waist. Han Sen and Bauer ignored him. Ningyu had been affected by that little green sword way too much. He had become a woman with remarkably fragile emotions. Han Sen didn't dare to get too close to Ningyu or his little green sword. Han Sen was afraid of being affected by the little green sword and turning into what Ningyu had become. He would rather die before that happened. "Bauer, my first officer, you take over the wheel." Han Sen stood up and allowed Bauer to take the command chair. "Yes, Daddy Captain." Bauer gladly sat down and accepted control of the white whale. Once he didn't have to pilot the whale, Han Sen turned his attention to a map of the galaxy. Going to Sky Palace would be very difficult. If they took the normal route to Sky Palace, their chances of arriving safely were practically zero. "It looks like the Tianxia system is the only way we can go. If we do that, we can then head through the systems of chaos to get to Sky Palace," Han Sen muttered to himself as he stared intently at the galactic map. The route he proposed was the most dangerous path they could take, which also made it the safest as far as the threat of the Extreme King was concerned. That was the only route the Extreme King didn't have total control over, but the systems of chaos were even dangerous for deified elites. When Han Sen first followed the Ice Blue Knights through the systems of chaos, he was a first-hand witness to how frighteningly scary that place could be. The Tianxia system was a very dangerous system, as well. It was a giant xenogeneic space, but it was different from ordinary xenogeneic spaces. There were no stars, no seas, and no land. It was just an endless, foggy space that was choked by clouds. All sorts of tools were rendered useless there due to the magnetic storms that existed within the vapor. Ordinary ships were unable to travel through the Tianxia system. Plus, that endless space of clouds was known to host many terrifying xenogeneics. Many deified creatures lived all throughout Tianxia system. For an ordinary deified, making the trip would be very difficult. But this was the reason Han Sen had chosen to journey through the Tianxia system. The Extreme King wouldn't expect him to go that way. Overnight, Han Sen's name spread across the entire Geno universe. Before that day, not many creatures of the universe knew who Han Sen was. But when the Extreme King put out a universal APB for Han Sen, races all across the universe learned or remembered his name. Of course, what they remembered more than anything was the very high bounty on him. The reward being offered for Han Sen was enough to tempt any deified. Mr. Quinn, why are we not going to the White River system? We seem to be headed for Tianxia system instead. An Extreme King Knight looked Bao Quinn with confusion. The White River system is currently in turmoil. Interstellar pirates are everywhere there. It might seem easy for Han Sen to slip through the chaos, but it is a very populated place. Han Sen has a bold personality, so it most likely compelled him to go to the Tianxia system, Bao Quinn deduced tonelessly. But he is just a king. Tianxia system isn't a feasible route for someone of his level, the knight said after a moment of thought. Before he was exposed, no one would have believed he had the gall to disguise himself as a prince of the Extreme King, Bao Quinn responded, his eyes hard. Slow down. Bauer was pushing the white whale through the clouds at an insane speed. Although their transport could move very quickly, it was supposed to be a whale, not a fighter jet. Ningyu was lying on the floor, clutching a chair while bawling her eyes out. Her face was covered in tears and snot. Han Sen peered out at the endless clouds, and he couldn't help but frown. Although he already knew that the Tianxia system was dangerous, seeing the system with his own eyes had still taken him aback. Tianxia system's clouds extended in all directions like an ocean, making it hard for Han Sen to keep his sense of direction. The endless clouds were colorful, as if the white whale was surrounded by countless fluffy rainbows. The clouds were opaque enough that it was difficult to see beyond the closest layer. Now, Han Sen and his companions were traveling through blue clouds. They were endless, and they were scarier than the depths of the sea. In between the moving clouds, Han Sen could occasionally see cloud beasts dancing. Those crane-like cloud beasts were in flocks of several thousand. They flew together like a cloud of their own, all moving quickly in tandem. Inside the blue clouds, they would sometimes see the flash of magnetic storms. Typically, tools and gadgets were rendered useless by such storms. But fortunately, the big white whale of the crystallizers wasn't affected by powerful magnetic interference. The turbulence of the storms had no effect on the white whale, which was why Han Sen wasn't afraid to go through the Tianxia system. The white whale was like a deified creature, but it had no life force. Because of that, it didn't send out a life force for others to sniff out. Ordinary xenogeneics wouldn't attack it, and Han Sen had indeed seen many xenogeneics along the way. But most of them completely ignored the white whale. Some of the meaner ones tried to attack the white whale, but they couldn't really damage the hull of the ship. Aside from the cloud beasts, they rarely saw other elites in the system. Even those of the higher races rarely came to hunt here. It was way too dangerous, and it was almost never worth the risk. Pang! As the white whale blazed along, an explosion sounded off to the side. The clouds rumbled and rolled, sort of like a tsunami. It felt as if some terrifying creatures were in the middle of a war somewhere in the fog. Han Sen told Bauer to go past whatever it was. After all, they were running for their lives, not going on a safari. It was best not to attract the attention of anything, and so they should focus on getting through the fog as fast as possible. But before Bauer turned the white whale, a few people flew out of the big clouds. Terror was written across their faces, and they appeared to be running for their lives. Their worries meant nothing to Han Senator. He didn't have time to worry about people who were running for their lives. But when he got close enough to see their faces, Han Sen jerked back in surprise. Amidst the shadows, there were two pretty women that looked like twins. One was Gu Qingqing, and the other was Elysian Moon. Han Sen couldn't just ignore them. He had Bauer drive the white whale over to Gu Qingqing. When the people saw the white whale heading toward them, they turned in another direction, trying desperately to get away from this new threat as well. But soon after, they saw the mouth of the white whale open. Someone emerged through the gap. Qingqing, why are you here? Han Sen asked, looking at Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon. Gu Qingqing saw Han Sen, and so she flew towards him with Elysian Moon. When the others saw that Gu Qingqing and Han Sen seemed to know each other, they looked relieved. They flew over to the white whale, as well. There are deified creatures ahead. We should leave this place, Gu Qingqing said to Han Sen after flying over there. Follow me. Han Sen led the way. He invited Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon into the White Whale. The other people followed Gu Qingqing, entering the White Whale as well. Seeing that Gu Qingqing knew them, Han Sen made no effort to stop their entry. This is a battleship? And it can sail through the Tianxia system? This is so weird, said a 20-year-old man. He was one of the demon, and he had deep purple horns. He looked around the big white whale with great curiosity. Han Sen told Bauer to drive the white whale away from the deified creatures. Then he looked at the people who had followed Gu Qingqing aboard and asked, "Who are they?" There were a dozen of them, and they were all from different races. They were mostly dukes and kings. Gu Qingqing pointed at one of the young feather men. He hired Elysian Moon and me to protect him inside Tianxia system. Han Sen looked at the feather man. The man seemed very young, and his life force wasn't that strong. He was a marquis or duke, at best. "My name is Qing Yu. Thank you for saving me." "What is your name?" the feather man asked politely. Han Sen had no plans of hiding his identity. "You are the student of the newly deified Knife Queen? I have heard your name before," Fang Qingyu said, glancing curiously over Han Sen. Surprisingly, Fang Qingyu wasn't like the other feathers. All of the rest of the feathers hated Han Sen. When Han Sen saw that they had no reaction to his name, he figured that they hadn't heard that he was wanted by the Extreme King. It made sense. Equipment didn't work inside the Tianxia system, so contacting the outside world would have been impossible. They didn't know what had happened out there. Han Sen looked outside and noticed there were no more crazy clouds. They must be far away from the deified Xenogeniac now. This place should be safe. "You can leave," Han Sen said, turning to Fang Qingyu. Fang Qingyu quietly responded, "Brother Han, I would like you to take me all the way through the Tianxia system. What would require in trade for such a request?" "Sorry, I'm not here to play games, and I'm not interested in a business deal. Please get off my ship," Han Sen said firmly. He was on the lam. He wasn't interested in spending any more time with these people. He had only saved them because Gu Qingqing was there. "Brother Han, please consider it. Tell me how much you want, and I will gladly play you," Fang Qingyu said. "Sorry, I am a little busy. I cannot take you guys," Han Sen said. "Listen, buddy, you're going to end up embarrassing yourself." One of the destroyed stepped forward from behind Fang Qingyu. He glared at Han Sen as he spoke. Other dukes and kings slowly surrounded them, too. "What are you doing? Step back. Don't be rude to Brother Han," Fang Qingyu shouted, his face contorted in displeasure. But the other men didn't seem willing to stop. The destroyed leader laughed and said, "Mr. Fang, we are doing this for your own good. Our ride, Wind Cloudbird, was consumed by that deified Xenogeniac. Without a ship, we cannot travel through the Tianxia system. And now that there is a ship right here, we cannot deny that this is obviously the help of God. If you guys try this, then you are no better than pirates," Fang Qingyu said, not sounding happy at all. "Haha, Mr. Fang, you are right. We are pirates. Who else do you think would dare to escort you through a zone like the Tianxia system?" The people swapped glances with each other and laughed. Once they were in the Tianxia system, they had been planning to rob Fang Qingyu and kidnap Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon. They didn't have much luck, though. They entered the Tianxia system, and mere minutes before they planned to execute their sordid little scheme, they encountered a deified Xenogeniac. "You guys," Fang Qingyu's face changed. He was too furious to say anything. With that revelation, the situation made a little more sense to Han Senator. It would have been unusual for normal mercenaries to agree to escort Fang Qingyu into such a dangerous place. Entering the Tianxia system was way too risky. If someone was willing to go there, they were most likely interstellar pirates, or they were on the lam like Han Sen. "You're referring to us as you guys? Haven't you heard of the pirate? We are true pirates, so if you know who I am, then show some respect. I only want money. If I don't get it..." The destroyed king laughed threateningly as his sentence trailed off. Hearing the man's claim, Han Sen didn't know what to say. The guy was bluffing. The pirates were a powerful faction, and there were many of them. They robbed the amazingly rich and powerful, often entering high-race Xenogeniac spaces to attack their prey. They wouldn't behave like these guys, stealing from the weak in such a sneaky way. Many of the pirates started to approach Han Senator Gu Qingqing frowned and started to draw her sword, but Han Sen stopped her. Han Sen looked at the pirates and smiled. It is good that you aren't leaving. We need people here. We need men that are willing to tidy, clean, and make food. If you want to stay here, you may remain to do such things. When the pirates heard that, they laughed until their eyes watered. The demon man looked extra cocky, and he said, "The rebate and knife queen might be famous, but we don't care. Plus, you are only knife queen's student. How dare you propose that we become your deckhands? Stop talking to him. As it is his wish, we'll flip the offer around and make him the one who does the washing, cleaning, and cooking for us," one of the pirates said. They were fearless. They had seen the battleship from one end to the other. The ship was host to Han Sen, a little girl, and a very frightened woman. Aside from them, there was only a little red bird. "Let me do it," the demon man said with a smile. He unleashed his area. He went over to Han Sen while saying, "Do you want to get out, or do you want me to help you? If you want me to help, you will?" Before he could finish, Han Sen punched the man in the face. D*menu. The demon man suddenly looked terrifying. He lifted his fist and threw a punch at Han Sen that was imbued with sky demon powers. Very few demons could make use of those powers, and the few that could were mostly of a pure demon blood lineage. The fact that the demon could make use of sky demon powers surprised Han Sen, but the sky demon powers, even at full charge, was useless against Han Sen. That demon man was stunned when Han Sen's fist collided with his own. He had put all of his power into that strike, and Han Sen had blocked it. The demon man had shock written all over his face. His entire body stopped moving, and then a block of ice encased him. The other pirates were shocked too. The demon man wasn't a top king, but his sky demon power was nothing to trifle with. Han Sen had blocked that sky demon power and froze him in a single punch. That surprised them all. Many of the pirates pulled out their knives. Han Sen's hands closed into fists, and then he rushed into them. He threw punches that wrecked each of their king areas and their powers. He froze the pirates one by one, leaving them standing on the deck, motionless and confused. The pirates were dumbfounded. They were just a group of outlaws who weren't really connected to the pirate, and they had never witnessed a king with such impressive strength. "Don't. Stay back. If you come any closer, I'll kill her." The destroyed king had the quickest reaction. Upon seeing all his men frozen, he stumbled back toward Bauer and put a knife to her neck. Han Sen had already frozen all the other pirates. When he turned to see the frightened destroyed king holding a knife to Bauer's throat, he laughed and didn't approach. The destroyed king looked at his men in disbelief. The demon and two others had been kings, but Han Sen had dealt with them as easily as he had the dukes. They had all been frozen by Han Sen's punches. The entire group only lasted a few seconds. Han Sen grinned at the destroyed king. He didn't come any closer. "Don't take another step. If you do, what happens then is on you." The destroyed king's heart began to pound as Han Sen gazed at him. The destroyed pulled Bauer closer to himself, wanting to retreat with her as a hostage. For now, all he wanted was to leave. The further away he could get, the better. "Uncle," said a very young voice from the destroyed king's arms. When he lowered his head, he found that it was the little girl he was using as a hostage. The little girl had a knife to her neck, but she didn't look scared like most little girls would, however. She smiled at him, looking so happy. She even started to laugh. "Stop laughing!" the destroyed king shouted angrily at the little girl, feeling insulted. Before he could come up with another threat, though, the destroyed king's eyes widened in surprise and terror. The little red bird upon the girl's shoulder jumped into the air, and red flames began to spread from its flapping wings. It was like a volcano erupting. Under the incredible heat, the destroyed king-class knife suddenly melted into molten juice. But the fire in the bird's eyes didn't lessen. In fact, the bird seemed to grow even more enraged. The pirates all stood in a line, still chilled and shivering. They stood meekly before Bauer, listening attentively as she scolded them. "From now on, you guys are the deckhands of the White Whale. You'll be a cleaner, and you, a servant." Bauer gave them jobs, and the pirates all nodded as they were given assignments. They had been tamed, and none of them dared to refuse to do as they were told. Their eyes sometimes wandered to the little red bird sitting atop Bauer's shoulder, and the sight of it would send another involuntary shiver through them. 10 minutes before, the little bird had burned a sixth-tier destroyed king to nothing more than charcoal. There was too little of him left to even be considered cooked meat. Brother Fong, you should really leave now. Following me will only put you in more danger, Han Sen said to Fong Qingyu. Fong Qingyu shook his head. Brother Han, the Tianxia system isn't a place a marquis can make a living. How long do you think I could survive out there? After that, Fong Qingyu pulled something out of his pocket. He set it down in front of Han's senator with a slight smile. He said, Brother Han, do you remember this? After Han Sen got a good look at what Fong Qingyu was holding, he was confused. He didn't recognize the item. The item looked like a common, 3x3, six-sided Rubik's Cube. 9 squares occupied each face. But unlike a normal Rubik's Cube, each square on this cube contained a strange image. Each image was like a small painting of a place that Han Sen had never been before. Some of them showed starscapes, whereas others showed mountains and rivers. Others simply showed off rooms or palatial halls. When Fong Qingyu looked at Han Sen's face, he realized that Han Sen didn't recognize it. He smiled and said, This is the Wanjia Rubik's Cube. It is a xenogenic treasure from the 1,000 treasures. Everyone who has a Wanjia Rubik's Cube can contact others with a Wanjia Rubik's Cube. You can even use video. To simplify this for you, the Wanjia Rubik's Cube is like a phone, but it is a xenogenic treasure, so you don't need a signal. You can communicate through space without being affected by magnetic storms. This is a powerful tool. If you have a treasure like this, you can ask your family or friends to come pick you up, right? Han Sen said. Fong Qingyu smiled wryly. Brother Han, I'm not showing this to you so that I can leave. I am a member of the 1,000 Treasures Alliance. Although the Alliance isn't considered a part of the 1,000 Treasures race, we have the same level of authority as the 1,000 Treasures. My Wanjia Rubik's Cube can connect to other members of the 1,000 Treasures. They can see everything I see. What does that mean? Han Sen frowned. Fong Qingyu quickly waved his hand and said, Don't misunderstand me, Brother Han. The Wanjia Rubik's Cubes need to be activated for others to see my image. Right now, it is not open, and so no one will know anything about what is going on here. After pausing, Fong Qingyu went on to say, Your battleship is incredible. It can even travel through the Tianxia system unimpeded. The 1,000 treasures want every treasure, including rare items in dangerous places like the Tianxia system. There are so many items in this system that most people couldn't tell what is valuable and what isn't, but with the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, we could send images back to the 1,000 treasures. They could identify what is worth taking and what isn't. If they see something that they want, they will pay a high price for the items you bring back to them. Han Sen smiled and said, Brother Fong, I'm afraid you don't know my situation. I know you are Knife Queen's student. Fong Qingyu looked at Han Sen with a modicum of confusion. Han Sen waved his hand to interrupt him. He smiled and said, You can use your Wanjia Rubik's Cube to contact your 1,000 Treasures friends, and perhaps they might let you know a thing or two about me as well. Fong Qingyu looked confused, and so he turned on his Wanjia Rubik's Cube. In one of the squares, another member of the 1,000 Treasures appeared. Fong Qingyu spoke to him, and his expression became increasingly apprehensive as the conversation went on. When the conversation was over, Fong Qingyu turned and stared toward Han Sen for a long moment. A while later, he muttered, Brother Han, are you not afraid that I will expose your location? What is there to be afraid of? The Extreme King must already be in the Tianxia system by now, so it doesn't really matter, Han Sen said with a shrug. Now you should understand why I don't want to bring you along. I cannot do the things you want me to, like stopping and collecting treasures along the way. Fong Qingyu's eyes brightened as he looked at Han Sr. If that is true, you should definitely take me with you. Why? Han Sen asked in surprise. Brother Han, I know you only want me off the ship so I don't get pulled into this, which was a kind thought. Also, I'm carrying a Wanjia Rubik's Cube. You probably think that if I go with you, I might expose your location, and the Extreme King might have an easier time following you, Fong Qingyu said. I'm glad that you understand, Han Sen said. Fong Qingyu shook his head. But I also think you are wrong. How so? Han Sen looked at Fong Qingyu with interest. My presence might expose information about your escape, but that sort of exposure isn't necessarily a bad thing, Fong Qingyu said seriously. There was no humor in his expression. What does that mean? I really don't understand, Han Sen replied. Fang Qing, you set the Wanjie Rubik's Cube in front of Han Sr. You can take the Wanjie Rubik's Cube, and you can decide whether you want to turn it on or off. Or you could just throw me off the ship. But I must tell you that if you allow me to stay, I will expose your location with the Wanjie Rubik's Cube. And I will take loads of photos. Fang Qingyu, are you tired of living? Others might be afraid of the 1,000 treasures, but do you think a guy who disguised himself as a prince of the Extreme King would care about the life of some snot-nosed 1,000 treasures member? Elysian Moon snorted in derision. Keep talking. Han Sen remained focused on Fang Qingyu, and he didn't seem upset. Calm down, Elysian Moon. What I have said makes sense. I'm not selling Brother Han out. Fang Qingyu paused. He looked at Han Sen and said, Brother Han, you are escaping to Sky Palace, yes? Yes, Han Sen answered immediately. He had never planned to hide the fact that Sky Palace was his destination. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Miss Mirror know where he was going. In fact, he wanted everyone to know he was going to Sky Palace. If I'm understanding the situation correctly, Brother Han, you are going through the Tianxia system to reach the systems of chaos in order to get to Sky Palace? Fang Qingyu asked. That is correct.
Han Sen nodded.
In that case, you should let me film this. And do it in HD quality. Fang Qingyu sounded really excited. Talk me through your idea, Han Sen said to Fang Qingyu. He was beginning to think that this young man was a very interesting person. The path you have selected isn't bad. You have taken a road that the Extreme King have no control over. Plus, you have a pretty amazing ship in the shape of a big whale. It is a fair assessment that the Extreme King won't catch up to you very quickly. But the road you have selected is also very dangerous. Even if the Extreme King don't catch you, your path is full of risks. Both the Tianxia system and the systems of chaos have innumerable dangers, many of which are impossible to predict or anticipate. And the Extreme King have 3 teams of knights in the systems of chaos. They will probably be your greatest opposition. But if I send them a video of you at the proper time, we might actually be able to put them to use. Fang Qingyu's excitement took on a mischievous edge. A giant black beetle soared through the clouds, and upon the back of the black beetle rested a stone castle. Many Extreme King were moving about the castle as they fulfilled their various duties. Mr. Bao Qin. Mr. Bao Qin. An old member of the Extreme King raced over to the floating garden, where Bao Qin was drinking tea. Old butler, what's the rush? Bao Qin asked the butler, taking a sip of tea and putting down the cup. The old butler looked very excited. He stepped over to Bao Qing's chair and said, We found him. We have found where Han Sen is. Oh, where is he? Bao Qin jerked his head up in surprise. The investigators themselves hadn't brought him this news, so he wasn't sure how the butler had received word. Here, the old butler brought out a Wanjie Rubik's Cube. He set it in front of Bao Qin and pressed one of the squares to show the video. A boat appeared, traveling through a sea of blue clouds. A man sat on the small boat, appearing relaxed and comfortable as he paged through a book. At the front of the boat, a line of creatures were using their power to pull the ship forward. The creatures were from a dozen different races, and there was even a demon amongst them. They were like huskies pulling a sleigh as they struggled to drag the boat forward. If they slowed down for a second, the man atop the boat would wave his hand and whip the creatures. The blows broke their armor and flesh, and they screamed with every strike. The man, meanwhile, never even looked up from his book. One of the creatures pulling the boat, a feather man, was covered in wounds. It looked as if he had received numerous beatings. His head was lowered, but he had secretly activated the Rubik's Cube. He looked very angry. Save me. If anyone can get me out of here, I will give them all the treasure I have in the 1,000 Treasures Alliance. No, I will give 70%, said the man's voice. Bao Qin stared at the Rubik's Cube on the table in front of him. What is going on? Bao Qin looked at the man on the boat, and then realized it was Han Sen, the very man they were after. The old butler was almost vibrating with excitement. The feather man pulling the boat is Fang Qingyu. He is a member of the 1,000 Treasures Alliance. He hired a group to help him explore the Tianxia system. While there, his group encountered Senator Han Sen, captured them, and set them all to pulling his boat. He appears to be trying to escape the Tianxia system. Fang Qingyu is a feather, but Han Sen doesn't know he is a member of the Thousand Treasures Alliance. Fang Qingyu has a Wanjie Rubik's Cube that he's using to send out a call for help, hoping that someone will rescue him. The old butler sounded so excited. Now that Fang Qingyu is sending messages through the Wanjie Rubik's Cube, we know where Han Sen is. All we must do is give chase. Who is this Fang Qingyu? Bao Qin asked the old butler. Rather than seeming happy, his face had turned down into a frown. The old butler quickly said, I have checked. Fang Qingyu is a feather, but he is an orphan. He was taken in by an elder of the Thousand Treasures Alliance. He has nothing to do with the feathers, and he has nothing to do with Han Senator. That elder from the Thousand Treasures Alliance has already sent people to the Tianxia system in order to save him. Good. Bao Qin nodded. He looked at the video on the Wanjie Rubik's Cube. Can you tell where he is within the Tianxia system? The old butler laughed. The blue sea clouds. There are hundreds of them across the Tianxia system, but the clouds in different areas all have unique identifying aspects. Judging from the information we've gleaned from the video and the direction the boat appears to be proceeding, we have deduced they are located in sea cloud number 75. We're in purple sea cloud number 86, which isn't too far from Han Sen's position. Keep an eye on them and turn us to an intercept course, Bao Qin said. Yes, Han Sen can't outrun us this time. No matter what, the old butler said. Then he sent the order to turn the giant black beetle toward Han Sen. As they began traveling through clouds that Han Sen had already passed through, the old butler frowned. Weird. When they went through here, they must have left some trace of their passage, even if it was only a single hair. Why can I not sense anything? Did we go the wrong way? Bao Qin smiled and said, if we found obvious evidence of their passage, then we'd know that we weren't on Han Sen's trail. He's too good to leave behind obvious signs of his presence. Go faster. We must be going the right way. Yes, the old butler answered, and the black beetle accelerated. They didn't discover any signs of Han Sen's presence, but based on the video of Fang Qing's Wanjie Rubik's Cube, they knew they were headed in the right direction. Han Sen's little boat wasn't moving nearly as fast as the black beetle. By the old butler's estimation, they would catch up to Han Sen in another 18 hours. At that moment, they glanced at the video on the Wanjie Rubik's Cube and saw that Han Sen's boat was coming to a stop. A group of cloud beasts appeared in front of the boat, then turned aggressively and attacked. Chaos ensued. Fang Qingyu was trying to fight off the Xenogeneics. He couldn't use the Wanjie Rubik's Cube at the same time, so the video was switched off. Oh no, it is a bunch of high-level cloud beasts. A few of them are king-class cloud apes. If Fang Qingyu is killed, we'll lose track of Han Sen, the old butler said, looking glum. Go full speed. Find them before they finish fighting the cloud beasts, Bao Qin commanded, his face grim. The giant black beetle flew at high speed toward the last location shown in the video. When they arrived, they found many cloud beasts in the midst of battle. But because they were surrounded by so many clouds, they could only catch occasional glimpses of the battleground. Bao Qin ordered the black beetle to be brought to a stop, then turned back to the old butler. Let's not get too close to the battleground. Before we enter, we should send someone in to scout. Before the old butler could agree, a huge white whale appeared out of the clouds and headed straight toward them. Following the white whale was a group of cloud beasts. They seemed very angry. Ready yourselves to fight, Bao Qin shouted, frowning as the white whale approached. The Black Beetle's extreme king knights quickly assembled into battle formations. The big white whale approached at high speed, but instead of ramming the Black Beetle as they expected, the whale dove and went right under their ship. Bao Qin and the extreme king knights wondered why the white whale had decided to simply pass them by, but they didn't have much time to think about it. The cloud beasts that had been chasing the whale surged over them in a wave. A king-class group of giant cloud dragons were flying behind the cloud beasts, but even they seemed weak and unthreatening compared to what followed. The giant cloud dragons were hitched to a rainbow-colored carriage made of cloud stone. Despite their incredible power and ferocity, the cloud dragons were being used as mere beasts of burden. ***. It's the sea demon's carriage. We have to get out of here. Bao Qin's face paled slightly, and his words were rushed. But it was already too late. The sea beasts were upon them, and the giant cloud dragons dragging the stone carriage arrived before the black beetle. The white whale had vanished at some point, and the giant black beetle was now surrounded by monsters of the clouds. The extreme king knights engaged the cloud beasts in combat. "Good job, everyone," Han Sen said to Fong Qingyu and the others as he admired the extreme king, who were now fighting the cloud beasts. "It is our honor to work for the captain and the little captain," one of the pirates said, bowing deeply. An ingratiating smile covered his face. "The captain and the little captain are the smartest people in the whole universe. Those extreme king aren't even fit to lick your boots. The captain is so handsome. The little captain is so beautiful. You both hold the universe in your hands, and every decision you make is a turning point in history. Long live the big captain and small captain. Long live the big captain and small captain." Han Sen looked at all the pirates who were gushing praises for him and Bauer, and he couldn't help but admit that it felt pretty good. Bauer was loving it. No wonder everyone wants to become a tyrant with an evil right-hand man. This is great, Han Sen thought happily. Luckily, Han Sen hadn't deluded himself into thinking that this was actually his idea. Fong Qingyu had come up with the plan, and Han Sen was only reaping the advantages of its employment. It was just as Fong Qingyu had said. The Tianxia system was way too dangerous, and getting through it safely might have been little more than wishful thinking. They hadn't been planning to encounter the scary cloud dragons. After all, Han Sen didn't dare to fight the cloud dragons. He piloted the white whale away from them as he tried to escape. Then, he allowed Fong Qingyu to create a scenario that would draw in the Extreme King search party. Once the Extreme King arrived, they had earned the ire of the monsters within minutes. The cloud dragons weren't happy to have intruders in their territory. Han Sen didn't know what the stone carriage behind the cloud dragons was, but after Fong Qingyu used the Wanjia Rubik's Cube to contact his 1,000-treasure stepfather, they learned that it was the legendary sea demon carriage. If not for the 1,000 treasures, Han Sen might not have fled from the carriage in time. It would have certainly been a nasty fight. That 1,000 treasures elder used the Rubik's Cube to tell Han Sen that the sea demon carriage was the most mysterious and scary xenogenics in the Tianxia system. The legend said that the giant cloud dragons pulled the Tianxia system's leader in that carriage. Not many people had ever glimpsed what was inside that carriage, though. When the sea demon carriage opened, anyone who saw it usually died shortly thereafter. The white whale hovered some distance from the battlefield. They hid amidst the clouds, and Fong Qingyu looked very excited. He filmed the fight between the Extreme King and the Cloud Beasts intently, streaming the video to his 1,000 treasures stepfather. Fong Qingyu took special care to capture the sea demon carriage on video. He would never miss an opportunity to film that. He wanted the chance to film the being inside the sea demon car. He wanted a first-hand account of this fight. That information might be the most valuable thing he had ever possessed. Of course, it wasn't just the information that would fetch a high price. The video itself would be worth a lot. Fong Qingyu's stepfather had already started working on it. The 1,000 Treasures was the best organization in the universe when it came to making money, and a video like that would be a money-making machine. The video would require some editing before it was released, though. Han Sen really admired the business acumen of the 1,000 Treasures. Plus, with Fong Qingyu remaining in constant contact with his stepfather, the 1,000 Treasures could give them information about any creatures they encountered in the Tianxia system. Han Sen could avoid many potential dangers and pitfalls, and they wouldn't have to go up against a creature that might be too much for them. They could even detour around areas with a particularly high death toll. "It's out!" Fong Qingyu shouted very excitedly. Han Sen looked back to the battleground. The cloud dragons were cringing away from the open door of the carriage, and after a few long seconds, something stepped through the open door. All eyes were drawn to the newly emerged monster. Han Sen had never seen a living creature like it before. Its body was like a black cloud, with a black, demonic form standing somewhere in the middle. It was impossible to see exactly what the creature looked like, but it possessed a dark humanoid shape. But the being seemed to have a shadowy tail, and its hair was like fire. A pair of eyes could be seen through the dark cloud, burning with a red and purple flame. Only its disturbing eyes could be seen clearly, as everything else about its form was murky and indistinct. Bao Qin stood atop the castle, watching the scary creature emerge from the stone carriage. "Demon spirit," We of the Extreme King have never offended you. We were pursuing someone else along this path, but that scary creature didn't answer. Its eyes glowed evilly, and it threw a punch toward Bao Qin. Boom! Han Sen and the others didn't see the punch land, but they could see the enormous black beetle explode under the force of the shockwave. Blood rained everywhere, dyeing the blue clouds scarlet around it. Some Extreme King Knights hadn't been able to get clear of the black beetle, and so the hit destroyed their King Knight bodies. They disintegrated, becoming a part of that red mist. Bao Qin hung in the air, and the ghostly demon spirit teleported directly in front of him. It has started. Han Sen's eyes brightened with anticipation. There was going to be a deified fight. If the two fighters ended up badly injured, he could take advantage of the situation and claim them both. Han Sen watched the battle in the hopes of finding an opportunity to score some easy kills, but something soon happened that made him rethink his plans. Music wafted into Han Sen's ears. Upon hearing the first note, Han Sen's mind seemed to buzz, like the vibration that would be left behind if someone struck him on the head with a hammer. Han Sen only found the sensation to be slightly uncomfortable, but the Duke-class pirates began to fall over, coughing up blood as they curled into fetal position. They clawed at their ears, screaming in agony. They were bleeding from all 7 of their holes. Oh no! A deified Extreme King has used a sonic attack. The white whale is tough, but it is weak against sonic attacks. We have to go. Han Sen turned the white whale and piloted it far away. The white whale was just a piece of technology, so it couldn't adapt to everything that was thrown at it. Fang Qingyu was the weakest person on board, and so he was doing far worse than all the others. Luckily, Han Sen released a king area that subdued most of the acoustic effect. If he hadn't done that, the sonic powers would have liquefied Fang Qingyu's brain. The white whale traveled through the clouds at full speed. After tens of thousands of miles, the effectiveness of the sonic powers started to subside. But Han Sen's crew still suffered from the scary shockwaves of the battle. After what had just happened, Han Sen was no longer interested in trying to kill the fighters once they were injured. He just wanted to leave the area, and that was that. Don't go. If you leave now, we won't film the fight. And if we don't film the fight, everything we've invested will be wasted. I have to go back and keep filming. Fang Qingyu shouted at Han Sen as soon as he was feeling better. You're crazier than I am. You're willing to die for money? Han Sen looked at Fang Qingyu with utter shock. This man really did care about money above all else. The Thousand Treasures Alliance cannot invest in a venture that loses money. I have to go back, Fang Qingyu said with obvious difficulty. Seeing that Fang Qingyu wasn't kidding, Gu Qingqing said, It won't matter how much money you make if you're dead, will it? Fang Qingyu shook his head with a wry smile. You guys don't understand. This isn't only about me. My team invested a lot into this. If you don't follow the plan we made, I won't be the only one getting screwed. My whole team will be. They invested all their money into this. That means they will all go bankrupt, and that might result in them all committing suicide. Give me your Wanjia Rubik's code, and I will film it for you, Han Sen said after a moment. Han Sen hadn't wanted to leave so abruptly, either, but Bauer, Ningyu, and Gu Qingsheng were all on board the ship. He didn't want to put their lives at risk. If he went back there alone, there wouldn't be as much to worry about. I don't know if Fang Qingyu was shocked. It'll be fine. Han Sen took the Wanjia Rubik's cube out of Fang Qingyu's hands. Then, he spoke to Bauer. Bauer, take them farther away. I will catch up. After that, he took the Wanjia Rubik's cube and exited the white whale. He headed straight back for the battlefield. With Bauer guiding them away and the little red bird protecting them, they should be able to survive an encounter with even a deified Xenogeniac. Han Sen wasn't too worried about their safety. And in regards to Han Sen himself, he knew he would be able to survive. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone back alone. The clouds were rumbling. The music sounded eerie and demonic. Under the force of the sonic power, a big blue cloud was roiling and rolling away like an ocean wave. Many Xenogeniacs and cloud beasts, which commonly lived inside such clouds, were all scrambling away as they fled desperately for their lives. But some of the smaller cloud beasts and Xenogeniacs didn't have enough time to escape. They were killed by the sonic sounds. They died before they could leave the clouds, and their corpses were tossed along with the rolling clouds like flotsam caught by the tide. Han Sen used his Dongxian area and jade skin. He summoned all of his strength to fight back that sonic power. But even still, he could barely withstand it as he drew near to the battlefield. He felt like his head was going to get ripped open by that soul piano note. Han Sen's heart leaped in his chest, and he summoned a beast soul. It was an eyeball-shaped beast soul with a red pupil. It was the deified class Blood-Eye Evil God Beast Soul Han Sen had managed to retrieve from Du God City. The Blood-Eye Evil God's body was the eyeball Han Sen had managed to kill as it tried to escape. The statue of 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes had merely some sort of host or shell that the creature inhabited. Mutant deified class Beast Soul Blood-Eye Evil God, I-type. The beast soul flew into Han Sen's left eye. It grew incredibly thin and formed itself into a half-sphere. Then it fitted itself onto Han Sen's left eyeball like a contact lens. Han Sen's left eye was veiled in red. His entire eyeball gleamed crimson, and a bloody light seemed to swirl within the orb. The purple eye butterfly's power lay in its ability to analyze and rewind the history of an object. The power of the Blood-Eye Evil God Beast Soul was different. As the bloody color deepened within Han Sen's left eye, the red light of his pupil seemed to swirl restlessly. Suddenly, the red light poured out of Han Sen's eye. The blood light wrapped around Han Sen's entire body, turning him into a bloody shadow. His face was no longer visible, and he seemed more like an unsettling absence than anything tangible. But his entire body, or what could be seen of it, was blood red. When Han Sen became this blood shadow, everything in his vision changed. Han Sen saw a giant cloud dragon flying far away. He could see the creature's eyes, and he saw himself reflected in those eyes. The next second, Han Sen's heart jumped. He leaped into those eyes. Han Sen found himself hiding somewhere within the creature's vision, as if he had slipped behind the reflective surface of the cloud dragon's eyes. Han Sen would be safe and invisible inside that space unless the eye's reflective surface was broken. That was the only way someone could hurt him now. Han Sen hid within the giant cloud dragon's eye, and he turned, realizing that he could see what the dragon saw as well. When this giant cloud dragon's eyes met those of another dragon, Han Sen moved. He traveled into the eyes of the second dragon. This movement was similar to jumping from mirror to mirror. He didn't have teleportation abilities, but he couldn't be attacked. And furthermore, no one could see his body. It was like Han Sen could look into a mirror, then trade places with his own reflection. Han Sen's entire body could teleport into the eyes of whoever he saw. Rather than just assuming their vision, he was actually physically transporting himself. But when Han Sen moved into the eyes of another being, the creature's pupils would turn blood red. It was an obvious indicator of his presence, and it would be easy for others to spot where he was. After doing a few more jumps, giant cloud dragon's eyes turned to meet Bao Qin's eyes. Han Sen immediately teleported into the deified Extreme King's eyes. Han Sen's vision became Bao Qin's vision. Being in the man's eyes allowed Han Sen to see what he saw. I jumped straight into a deified elite's eyes? Han Sen was ecstatic. Not even a deified elite could stop the powers of the Blood-Eye Evil God Beast Soul. This surprised him quite a bit.